Today, the book which we are going to start it's about the women empowerment in Saudi Arabia, and it is the classic international bestseller. Its name is Princess, and it's the story of a life inside Saudi Arabia's royal family. And we are going to read the updated version of this book. This book is written by Jean Sasson. This book has acclaimed some really good international reviews, and we will start this book by reading them first. According to Sunday Express, the startling truth behind the veiled lives of Saudi Arabia's women, frank and vivid revelations. Another review by best-selling author of Not Without My Daughter, Betty Mahmoodi says, anyone with the slightest interest in human rights will find this book heart-wrenching. It is a well-written, personal story. It had to come from a native woman to be believable. Publisher Weekly says, gripping, a fast-paced, enthralling, drama-rich in detail. People magazine find this book a mind-boggling look at the everyday life of a contemporary woman in the 21,000 member strong royal family. Absolutely riveting. The author of this book, Jean Sasson, has dedicated this book to Jack. This book includes 20 chapters, excluding the introduction, a note from the author, and a letter from Princess Sultana. An important note, the story of Princess Sultana is true. While the words are those of the author, the story is that of the princess. The shocking human tragedies described here are factual. Names have been changed and various events slightly altered to protect the well-being of recognizable individuals. In telling this story, it is not the intention of the author nor of the princess to demean the Islamic faith. Author's note, in the late 1970s, I traveled to Saudi Arabia as a single female seeking adventurous travel. I arrived in the kingdom on 7 September 1978 and remained in that country until the spring of 1991. From 1978 until 1982, I worked in medical affairs administration at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center. During those 4 years, I met various members of the Saudi royal family. After leaving the royal hospital, after marrying British citizen Peter Sasson, I remained in the kingdom for an additional 9 years, living in a villa in a Saudi neighborhood with my husband. During these 12 years, I was in an advantageous position to learn much about a country little understood by the rest of the world. I also befriended many middle-class Saudi Arabians and other Arab nationals who lived in Saudi Arabia. During this time, I traveled widely, becoming familiar with many Arab countries. Due to a Saudi government ban on travel to Israel, I was unable to visit Israel until after 1991. In 1983, I met an extraordinary Saudi woman, Princess Sultana Al Saud. I instantly liked this Saudi royal. To my mind, she was all that a woman. Not only was Sultana young and beautiful, but she was charming, intelligent, and possessed of an independent spirit that I had rarely discovered in other Saudi women. As our friendship slowly developed, I came to know a woman who had been deeply wounded by her lack of fatherly love. Although she had been born into an extremely wealthy family, owning 4 mansions on 3 continents, enjoying private jets and jewelry worth millions, when it came to personal freedom, Sultana had few. And despite her outward charm and gaiety, I soon came to see that Princess Sultana was a woman who was inwardly seething at her inability to control her own life. The male relatives in her family had life and death power over her and over her daughters. As time passed, our friendship flourished and Princess Sultana slowly related the story of her own life, from her turbulent childhood to her arranged marriage, as well as the shocking episodes from the lives of her 9 sisters, her friends, and her servants. 2 or 3 years after first meeting Sultana, she asked me to write her story. She was determined that the world learn about the mistreatment of women in her country. I was less enthusiastic, concerned for her safety. I also pondered the possibility that no one would take an interest in the life of a princess, living in a kingdom so suspicious of foreigners that tourists were not even allowed to visit. Peter and I divorced after 8 years of marriage, but I was fortunate to have a multi exit re entry visa. So I continued traveling back and forth into the kingdom. I left the kingdom permanently in the spring of 1991. Although Sultana was impatient for her story to be told, I waited until after everyone and I counted as a close friend had left before writing this book. After the first Gulf War and after the release of my first book, The Rape of Kuwait, the world began to clamor for information about the secretive world of Saudi Arabia. When Princess was published, the world embraced Sultana's true story, coming to love a woman who had allowed them to peek behind the veil and inside the palace walls. Readers discovered that although much of Sultana's life was grim, she also enjoyed moments of great joy. The true stories of her life depicted in this book relay the easy camaraderie, humor, and love among her mother, sisters, and female servants. Readers enjoy hilarious moments when learning about Sultana's secret revenge on her insufferable brother Ali. This book struck a chord with women of every age and nationality, quickly becoming a bestseller in many countries. Many teachers now list Princess as required reading for their literature classes. I'm also honored to say that the book was named as one of the best 500 books written by women by the Reader's Guide for Women's Studies since the year 1300. The huge success of Princess, which hooked many readers, combined with further shocking events in Sultana's life, created a desire for a second book. Approximately a year after Princess was published, I was surprised and happy to hear from Sultana once again. In order to ensure her personal safety, Sultana and I had previously agreed to end our relationship. A telephone call ended our deliberate estrangement. Sultana wanted me to continue writing about her life and to concentrate on her own two teenage daughters. With Sultana's request, I temporarily stopped the project I was on and took up where I had left off with Princess. Daughters of Arabia was soon published. The world now learned about Sultana's two beautiful daughters, Maha and Amani. Afterwards, the princess and I received so many requests for an update on her life and on the work she was doing to help other women that the third and final book was written several years ago, titled Desert Royal. More than a decade has passed since I first penned the first book about Princess Sultana, yet the book remains timeless. Why? Because life for women in Saudi Arabia remains much the same as when I lived in the kingdom. While there is a much talk about needed change for women's life in the kingdom, and a few women in Saudi Arabia are trying to break the chains that bind them, I'm sorry to report that in the year 2004, the women of Saudi Arabia are still not free to pursue their dreams. Although the Quran calls only for modesty in dress, most Saudi Arabia are still willing. Although there is no precedent in the Islamic faith for a law forbidding women to drive, Saudi women are bound by such a law. Although 58% of Saudi college graduates are female, only 6% of the workforce is female. Why? Because Saudi women are not allowed to work to intermingle with men not of their family. Although Islam gives women the right to say no to an unwanted marriage, many young girls in Saudi Arabia still endure the horror of arranged marriage with men double or triple their age. There is much to be done when it comes to the lives lived by so many unfortunate women. It is up to us, women who are free to express our thoughts and to control our own actions, to help these women in any way we can. These books about a feisty Saudi princess have changed lives all over the world. Many young women worldwide now work to create awareness and change. Students write to tell me that college Horses are chained so that they can work on issues relating to women. Mothers rise to tell me that they are raising their sons to look upon their sisters and other women as equal beings. Working together, we can make a huge difference in the role of women worldwide. I urge you to join Princess Sultana and me in our cherished goal to live in a world where every female has the right to live a life of dignity. As a writer and as a friend, I am proud to be the voice of Princess Sultana. A letter from Princess Sultana. Dear readers of Princess, as I write these words, I am smiling with contentment that you are about to read the story of my childhood and early marriage. Since I was a young girl, unloved by my father and tortured by a cruel older brother, I longed for the opportunity to tell the entire world how too many young Saudi girls live lives clouded by sadness or anger, that their brothers are greatly loved while they, as females, are merely endured. I have lived my life as a princess, and still I have had few options. My father only loved his sons. I wanted to be loved by my father, but nothing I did or said made the slightest change in his indifference toward me. Although uneducated, my parents were of royal family, so I was provided with many good things such as education and ample food and beautiful gowns and jewels. I was surrounded by loving older sisters, and my kindly mother always tried to protect me from the men in our family. I was luckier than most. I can scarcely imagine how other young Saudi girls abide their lives. I know of young girls who are forced to become the third or fourth wife of old men. I know of young women who have been instantly divorced when diagnosed with serious illness. Some of these women are mothers, and their terrorized children are taken from their arms to be raised by another woman. I know of young girls who have been put to death by members of their own family, often for nothing more than perceived misconduct. I know too many tragic stories. You will learn these stories in the 3 books about my life and the lives of the women I know. You may ask, how does such cruelty continue in an oil-rich country so wealthy that every citizen should be educated and enlightened? I believe that most men in my land want to rule everyone around them, and in particular to rule the women in their lives. Such actions are assisted by men of their religion, who purposely twist the words of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the sole purpose of keeping women in subservient position. We Saudi women have few possibilities for genuine change. We Saudi women need your help. Many of you live in countries where you can insist that your government demand change from one of their economic and political partners, Saudi Arabia. But we Saudi women are not only people who need your help. As I learn more about the status of women worldwide, I have made the surprising discovery that women the world over are ill-treated by men. Young girls from Laos and Cambodia and Thailand are forced into the sex slave trade. Female babies in China are left to hillside to starve. Midwives in India are paid to snap the spines of infant females because the family only wants sons. American women are often murdered by jealous boyfriends or husbands. I am often sorry that I know such things, for this knowledge makes me ill with grief. We must all work together to bring change to this earth. We must persist until every female child is welcomed as joyously as a male child. I pray for Allah's good blessings upon this quest. Princess Sultana Al Saud. Introduction. In a land where kings still rule, I am a princess. You must know me only as Sultana. I cannot reveal my true name for fear harm will come to me and my family for what I am about to tell you. I am a Saudi princess, a member of the royal family of the House of Al Saud, the crowned rulers of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. As a woman in a land ruled by men, I cannot speak directly to you. I have requested an American friend and writer Jean Sasson, to listen me and then to tell my story. I was born free, yet today I am in chains. Invisible, they were loosely draped and passed unnoticed until the age of understanding reduced my life to a narrow segment of fear. No memories are left to me of my first 4 years. I suppose I laughed and played as all young children do, blissfully unaware that my value, owing to the absence of a male organ, was of no significance in the land of my birth. To understand my life, you must know those who came before me. We present day Al Sauds date back 6 generations to the days of the early emirs of the Najd, the Bedouin lands now part of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These first Al Sauds were men whose dreams carried them no further than the conquest of nearby desert lands and the adventures of night raids on the neighboring tribes. In 1891, disaster struck when the Al Sauds clan was defeated in battle and forced to flee the Najd. Abdul Aziz, who would one day be my grandfather, was a child at this time. He barely survived the hardship of that desert flight. Later, he would recall how he burned with shame as his father ordered him to crawl into a large bag, which was then slung over the saddle horn of his camel. His sister, Nora, was crammed into another bag hanging from the other side of their father's camel. Bitter that his youth prevented him from fighting to save his home, the angry young man peered from the back as he swayed with the gait of the camel. It was a turning point in his young life. He would later recall as he, humiliated by his family's defeat, watched the hunting beauty of his homeland disappear from view. After 2 years of nomadic desert travel, the family of Al Sauds found refuge in the country of Kuwait. The life of a refugee was so distasteful to Abdul Aziz that he vowed from an early age to recapture the desert sand he had once called home. So it was that in September 1901, 25 years old Abdul Aziz returned to our land. On 16 January 1902, after months of hardship, he and his men soundly defeated his enemies, the Rashids. In the year to follow, to ensure the loyalty of the desert tribes, Abdul Aziz married more than 300 women, who in time produced more than 50 sons and 80 daughters. The son of his favorite wives held the honor of favored status. These sons, now grown, are at the very center of power in our land. No wife of Abdul Aziz were more loved than Hassan Sodiri. The son of Hassan now had the combined force of Al Sauds to rule the kingdom, forged by their father. Fahad, one of these sons, is now our king. Many sons and daughters married cousins of the prominent section of our family, such as the Al-Turks, Jiluis, and Al-Kabirs. The present-day princes from these unions are among influential Al Sauds. In 1991, our extended family consisted of nearly 21,000 members. Of this number, approximately 1,000 are princes or princesses, who are direct descendants of the great leader King Abdul Aziz. I, Sultana, am one of these direct descendants. My first vivid memory is one of violence. When I was 4 years old, I was slapped across the face by my usually gentle mother. Why? I had imitated my father in his prayers. Instead of praying to Makkah, I prayed to my 6-year-old brother, Ali. I thought he was a god. How was I to know he was not? 32 years later, I remember the sting of that slap and the beginning of question in my mind. If my brother was not a god, why was he treated like one? In a family of 10 daughters and 1 son, fear ruled our home. Fear that cruel death would claim the one living male child. Fear that no other son would follow. Fear that God had cursed our home with daughters. My mother feared each pregnancy, praying for a son, dreading a daughter. She bore one daughter after another until there were 10 in all. My mother's worst fear came true when my father took another, younger wife for the purpose of giving him more precious sons. The new wife of promise presented him with 3 sons, all stillborn, before he divorced her. Finally, though with the fourth wife, my father became wealthy with sons. But my elder brother would always be the firstborn, and as such, he ruled supreme. Like my sisters, I pretended to revere my brother, but I hated him as only the oppressed can hate. When my mother was 12 years old, she was married to my father. He was 20. It was 1946, the year after the Great World War that interrupted oil production had ended. Oil, the vital force of the Saudi Arabia today, had not yet brought great wealth to my father's family, the Al Sauds, but its impact on the family was felt in a small ways. The leaders of the great nation had begun to pay homage to our king. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had presented King Abdul Aziz with a luxurious Rolls Royce. Bright green with a throne-like backseat, the car sparkled like a jewel in the sun. Something about the car, as grand as it was, obviously disappointed the king, for upon inspection he gave it to one of his favorite brothers, Abdullah. Abdullah, who was my father's uncle and close friend, offered him this car for his honeymoon trip to Jeddah. He accepted, much to the delight of my mother, who had never ridden in a car. In 1946, and dating back untold centuries, the camel was the usual mode of transport in the Middle East. 3 decades would pass before the average Saudi rode with comfort in a car, rather than astride a camel. Now, on their honeymoon for 7 days and nights, my parents happily crossed the desert trail to Jeddah. Unfortunately, in my father's haste to depart from Riyadh, he had forgotten his tent. Because of this oversight and the presence of several slaves, their marriage remained unconsummated until they arrived in Jeddah. That dusty, exhausting trip was one of my mother's happiest memories. Forever after, she divided her life into the time before the trip and the time after the trip. Once she told me that the trip had been the end of her youth, for she was too young to understand what lay ahead of her at the end of the long journey. Her parents had died in a fever epidemic, leaving her orphaned at the age of 8. She had been married at the age of 12 to an intense man filled with dark cruelties. She was ill-equipped to do little more in life than his bidding. After a brief stay in Jeddah, my parents returned to Riyadh, for it was there that the patriarchal family of the Al Sauds continued their dynasty. My father was a merciless man. As a predictable result, my mother was a melancholy woman. The tragic union eventually produced 16 children, of whom 11 survived trillious childhoods. Today, the 10 female offspring live their lives controlled by men to whom they are married. Their only surviving son, a prominent Saudi prince and businessman with 4 wives and numerous misters, lead a life of great promise and pleasure. From my reading, I know that most civilized successors of early culture smile at the primitive ignorance of their ancestors. As civilization advances, the fear of freedom for the individual through enlightenment, human society eagerly rushes to embrace knowledge and change. Astonishingly, the land of my ancestors is little changed from that of 1,000 years ago. Yes, modern buildings spring up, the latest healthcare is available to all, but consideration for women and for the quality of their lives still receives a shrug of indifference. It is wrong, however, to blame our Muslim faith for the lowly position of women in our society. Although the Quran does not state that the women are secondary to men, much in the same way the Bible authorizes man to rule over women. Our Prophet Muhammad taught only kindness and fairness toward those of my sex. The men who came behind Prophet Muhammad have chosen to follow the custom and tradition of the Dark Ages rather than to follow Muhammad's word and example. Our Prophet scorned the practice of infanticide, a common custom in his day of ridding the family of unwanted females. Prophet Muhammad's very words framed with his concern at the possibility of abuse and indifference towards female. Whoever hath a daughter and do not bury her alive, or scold her, or prefer his female children to her, may God bring him into paradise. Yet there is nothing men will not do. There is nothing they have not done in this land to ensure the birth of male, not female offsprings. The birth of a child born in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is still measured by the absence or the presence of a male organ. The men of my country feel they are what they have had to become. In Saudi Arabia, the pride of a man's honor evolves from his women. So he must enforce his authority and supervision over the sexuality of his women or face public disgrace. Convinced that women have no control over their own sexual desire, it then becomes essential that the dominant male carefully guard the sexuality of the female. This absolute control over the female has nothing to do with love, only with fear of the male's tarnished honor. The authority of a Saudi male is unlimited. His wife and children survive only if he desires. In our home, he is the straight. This complex situation begins with the rearing of our young boys. From an early age, the male child is taught that women are of little value. They exist only for his comfort and convenience. The child witnesses the disdain shown for his mother and sisters by his father. This open contempt leads to his scorn of all females and make it impossible for him to enjoy friendship with anyone of the opposite sex. Taught only the role of master to slave, it is a little wonder that by the time he is old enough to take a maid, he considers her his chattel, not his partner. And so it comes to be that women in my land are ignored by their fathers, scorned by their brother, and abused by their husband. This cycle is difficult to break, for the men who impose this life upon their women ensure their own marital unhappiness. For what man can be truly content surrounded by such misery? It is evident that the men of my line are searching for gratification by taking one wife after the other, followed by mistress after mistress. Little do these men know that their happiness can be found in their own home, with one woman of equality. By treating women as slaves, as property, men have made themselves as unhappy as the women they rule, and have made love and true companionship unattainable to both sexes. The history of our women is buried behind the black veil of secrecy. Neither our birth nor our death is made officially in any public record. Although births of male children are documented in family or tribal records, none of it is maintained anywhere for females. The common emotion expressed at the birth of a female is either sorrow or shame. Although hospital births and government record keeping are increasing, the majority of rural births take place at home. No country census is maintained by the government of Saudi Arabia. I have often asked myself, does this mean that we women of the desert do not exist? If our coming and our passing go unrecorded? If no one knows of my existence, does that mean I do not exist? These facts, more than injustices of my life, have prompted me to take this very real risk in order to tell my story. The women of my country may be hidden by the veil and firmly controlled by our stern, patriarchal society. But change will have to come, for we are a sex that is weary of the restraints of customs. We yearn for our personal freedom. From my earliest memories, aided by the sacred diary I began to keep at the age of 11, I will try to give you some portrayal of the life of a princess in the house of Al Saud. I will attempt to uncover the buried lives of other Saudi women, the millions of the ordinary women not born of the royal family. My passion for the truth is simple, for I am one of those women who were ignored by their father, scorned by their brother, and abused by their husband. I am not alone in this. There are many more, just like me, who have no opportunity to tell their stories. It is rare that truth escapes from a Saudi palace, for there is a great secrecy in our society. But what I have spoken here and what the author has written here is true. Chapter 1 Childhood. Ali slapped me to the ground, but I declined to hand over the shiny red apple just given to me by the Pakistani cook. Ali's face began to swell with anger as I hovered over the apple and quickly began to take huge bites and swallow them whole, refusing to give in to his male prerogative of superiority. I had committed a grave act and knew that I would soon suffer the consequences. Ali gave me 2 swift kicks and went running for our father's driver, Umar, an Egyptian. My sister feared Umar almost as much as they did Ali or my father. They disappeared into the villa, leaving me alone to face the combined wrath of the men of the house. Moments later, Omar, followed by Ali, rushed through the side gate. I knew they would be the victors, for my young life was already rich with precedent. I had learned at an early age that Ali's every wish would be fulfilled. Nevertheless, I swallowed the last bite of the apple and looked in triumph at my brother. Struggling vainly in the grasp of Omar's huge hand, I was lifted into the air to my father's study. Reluctantly, my father looked up from his black ledger and glanced with irritation at his seemingly ever present, unwanted daughter, while holding out his arm in an invitation to that treasured jewel, his eldest son. Ali was allowed to speak while I was forbidden to respond. Overwhelmed with desire for my father's love and approval, my courage was suddenly reborn. I shouted out the truth of the incident. My father and brother were stunned into silence at my outburst. For females in my world are reconciled to a stern society that frowns upon the voicing of our opinion. All women learn at an early age to manipulate rather than to confront. The fires in the heart of the once proud and furious Bedouin women have been extinguished. Soft women who bear little resemblance to them remain in their stead. The fear curled in my belly when I heard the shouting of my voice. My legs trembled under my body when my father arose from his chair, and I saw the movement of his arm but never felt the blow to my face. As punishment, Ali was given all my toys. To teach me that men were my masters, my father decreed that Ali would have the exclusive right to fill my plate at meal times. The triumph, Ali gave me the tiniest of portion and the worst cut of meats. Each night I went to sleep hungry. Ali placed a guard at my door and ordered him to forbid me to receive food from my mother or my sisters. My brother taunted me by entering my room at midnight, laden with plates steaming with the delicious smells of cooked chicken and hot rice. Finally, Ali wearied of his torture, but time on, when he was only 9 years old, he was my devoted enemy. Although I was only 7 years old as a result of the apple incident, I first became aware that I was female who was shackled by a male unburdened by conscience. I saw the broken spirits of my mother and sister, but I remained faithful to optimism and never doubted that I would one day triumph and my pain would be compensated by true justice. With this determination from an early age, I was the family troublemaker. There were pleasant times in my young life too. My happiest hours were spent at the home of my mother's aunt. Widowed, too old for further notice, and thus complication from men, she was now merry and filled with wonderful stories from her youth and the days of the tribal battle. She had witnessed the birth of our nation and mesmerized us with the tales of the valor of King Abdulaziz and his followers. Sitting cross-legs on priceless oriental carpets, my sister and I nibbled on plates of date pastries and almond cakes, while immersed in the drama of a great victories of our kinsman. My auntie inspired me to a new pride in my family as she told of the Al Saud bravery in battle. In 1891, my mother's family had accompanied the Al Saud clan in their fight from Yad when they were defeated by the Rashid clan. 10 years later, a male member of her family returned with Abdulaziz to recapture the land. My auntie's brother fought alongside Abdulaziz. These shows of loyalty ensured their entry into the royal family by the marriage of their daughters. The stage was set for my destiny as a princess. In my youth, my family was privileged. Though not yet wealthy, the income from oil production ensured that food was plentiful and medical care available, which at that time in our society seemed the great of luxuries. We lived in a large villa made of concrete blocks painted snowy white. Each year, the sandstorm turned the white to cream, but father's slaves would dutifully repaint the sand-colored stones white. The 30-foot block walls surrounding our grounds were maintained in the same fashion. The childhood home I took for granted was a mansion by the Western standard. Yet, looking back, it was a simply dwelling by today's Saudi royal expectations. As a child, I felt our family home was too large for warm comfort. The long hallways were dark and forbidding. Rooms of various shapes and sizes branched off, concealing the secrets of our life. Father and Ali lived in the man's quarter on the second floor. I used to peer into their quarter with the curiosity of the child I was. Dark red velvet curtain closed out the sunlight. A smell of Turkish tobacco and whiskey embraced the heavy atmosphere. One timid look, and then with a rush I would return to the women's quarter on the ground floor where my sister and I occupied a large wing. The room I shared with Sarah faced the women's private garden. Mother had had the room painted a bright yellow. As a result, it had the glow of life that was so glaringly absent in the rest of the villa. The family servants and slaves lived in a tiny airless rooms in a separate dwelling set apart at the back of the garden. While our villa was air-conditioned, the servants' quarters were ill-equipped for enduring the hot desert climate. I remember the foreign maids and drivers speaking of their dread of bedtime. Their only relief from the heat was the breeze generated by small electric fans. Father said that if he provided their quarters with air conditioning, they would sleep the whole day through. Only Umar slept in a small room in the main house. A long golden cord hung in the main entrance of our villa. This cord was connected to a cowbell in Umar's room. When Umar was needed, he would be summoned by the ringing of this bell. The sound of the bell day or night would bring him to his feet and the father's door. Many times, I must admit, I rang the bell during Umar's naps or in the middle of the night. Then, lungs bursting, I would rush to my bed and lie quiet, an innocent child sleeping soundly. One night, my mother was waiting for me as I raced for the bed. With disappointment etched on her face at the missed hero of her youngest child, she twisted my ear and threatened to tell father. But she never did. Since my grandfather's day, we had owned a family of Sudani slaves. Our slave population increased each year when father returned from Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Makkah made by Muslims with new slave children. Pilgrims from Sudan and Nigeria attending Hajj would sell their children to wealthy Saudis so that they could afford the return journey to their new homeland. Once in my father's care, the slaves were not bought and sold in the manner of the American slaves. They participated in our home life and in my father's business as if they were their own. The children were our playmates and felt no compulsion to servitude. In 1962, when our government freed the slaves, our Sudanese family actually cried and begged my father to keep them. They live in my father's home to this day. My father kept alive the memory of our beloved King Abdulaziz. He spoke about the great man as if he saw him each day. I was shocked at the age of 8 to be told the old king had died in 1953, 3 years before I was born. After the death of our first king, our kingdom was in grave danger. For the old king's hand-picked successor, his son Saul, was sadly lacking in the quality of leadership. He extravagantly squandered most of the country's oil, wealth on palaces, cars, and trinkets for his wives. As a result, our new country was sliding toward the political and economic chaos. I recall one occasion in 1963 when the men of the ruling family gathered in our home. I was very curious, 7 years old at that time. Omar, my father's driver, burst into the garden with a manner of great importance and shouted for the women to go upstairs. He waved his hand at us as if he were exercising the house of beasts and literally hurried us up the stairwell and into a small sitting room. Sarah, my older sister, pleaded with my mother for permission to hide behind the arabesque balcony for a rare glimpse of our rulers at work. While we frequently saw our powerful male uncle and cousins at casual family gatherings, never were we present in the midst of an important matter of state. Of course, at the time of each female menses and subsequent dwelling, the cut off from any males other than father and brother was sudden and complete. Our lives were so cloistered and boring that even our mother took pity on us. That day, she actually joined her daughter on the floor of the hallway to peep through the balcony and listen to the men in the large sitting room below us. I, as the youngest, was held in my mother's lap. As a precaution, she lightly placed her fingers on my lips. If we were caught, my father would be furious. My sisters and I were captivated by the grand parade of the sons, grandsons, and nephews of the deceased king. Large men in the flowing robes, they gathered quietly with great dignity and seriousness. The stoic face of Crown Prince Faisal drew our attention. Even to my young eyes, he appeared sad and terribly burdened. By 1963, all Saudis were aware that Prince Faisal competently managed the country while King Saud ruled incompetently. It was whispered that Saud's reign was only a symbol of the family unity so ferociously protected. The feeling was that it was an odd arrangement, unfair to the country and to Prince Faisal, and unlikely to last. Prince Faisal stood apart from the group. His usual quiet rose above the din as he asked that he be allowed to speak on matters that were of grave importance to the family and the country. Prince Faisal feared that the throne, which had been so difficult to attain, would soon be lost. He said that the common people were tiring of the excesses of the royal family, and that there was a talk not only of ousting their brother Saud for his decadence, but also of turning away from the entire Al Saud clan and choosing instead a man of godful leadership. Prince Faisal looked hard at the younger princes when he stated in a clear, sure voice that their disregard for the traditional lifestyle of Bedouin believer would topple the throne. He said his heart was heavy from sadness that so few of the younger royals were willing to work, content to live on their own monthly stipend from the oil well. A long pause ensued as he waited for comments from his brother and relatives. As none seemed to be forthcoming, he added that if he, Faisal, were at the controls of the oil well, the flow of money to the princes would be cut and honorable work would be sought. He nodded his head at his brother Muhammad and sat down with a sigh. From the day balcony, I noticed the nervous skimming of several youthful cousins. Even though the largest monthly stipend was no more than $10,000, the men of the Al Saud clan grew increasingly wealth from the land. Saudi Arabia is a huge country, and the most of the property belongs to our family. In addition, no building contracts are signed without benefit to one of our own. Prince Muhammad, the third eldest living brother, began to speak, and from what we could gather, King Saud had now insisted on the return of absolute power that had been taken from him in 1958. He was rumored to be in the countryside speaking out against his brother Faisal. It was a devastating moment for the family of Al Saud, but its member had always shown a unified front to the citizen of Saudi Arabia. I remember when my father had told the story of why the eldest living son after Faisal, Muhammad, was passed over as a successor to the throne. The old king had declared that if Muhammad's disposition were backed by the power of the crown, many men would die, for Muhammad's violent temper was well known. My attention returned to the meeting, and I heard Prince Muhammad say that the monarchy itself was endangered. He broached the possibility of physically overthrowing the king and installing Prince Faisal in his stead. Prince Faisal gasped so loudly that the sound stifled Muhammad. Faisal seemed to be weeping as he spoke quietly. He told his kin that he had given his beloved father a deathbed promise that he would never oppose the ruler of his brother. In no event would he consider breaking the promise, not even if Saud bankrupted a country. If talk of ousting his brother was going to be the heart of the meeting, then he, Faisal, would have to depart. There was a hum of voices as the men of our family agreed that Muhammad, the eldest brother next to Faisal, should attempt to reason with our king. We watched as the men toyed with their coffee cups and made vows of loyalty to their father's wish that all the son of Abdul Aziz would confront the world as a united force. As the traditional exchange of farewells began, we watched as the men filed as silently from the room as they had entered. Little did I know that this meeting was beginning of the end of the ruler of my uncle, King Saud. As history unfolded and our family and countrymen watched in sadness, the son of Abdul Aziz were forced to evict one of their own from his land. Uncle Saud had become so desperate that in the end, he had sent a threatening note to his brother Prince Faisal. This one act sealed his fate, for it was unthinkable for one brother to insult or threaten another. In the unwritten rule of the Bedouin, one brother never turns against the other. A fever crisis erupted in the family and in the country, but we learned later that a revolution sought by Uncle Saud has been averted by the soft approach of Crown Prince Faisal. He stepped aside and left it to his brother and the man of religion to decide the best course of action for our young country. In doing so, he took away the personal drama of the movement so that it became a less volatile matter, with statements making appropriate decisions. 2 days later, we learned about the abdication from one of Uncle Saud's wives, for our father had been away at the time with his brother and cousins. One of our favorite aunties, married to King Saud, burst into our home in a great agitation. I was shocked to see her rip her veil from her face in front of our male servants. She had arrived from Uncle Saud's Nasiriya place, an edifice that, to my mind, was both a demonstration of what an endless money can buy and a ruinous example of what was wrong with our country. My sister and I gathered around our mother, for our auntie was now out of control and screaming accusation about the family. She was particularly incensed at Crown Prince Faisal and blamed him for her husband's dilemma. She told us that the brother of her husband had conspired to take the throne that had been given by their father to the one of his choice, Saud. She cried out that the religious council, the ulama, had arrived at the place that very morning and had informed her husband that he must step aside as a king. I was entranced by the scene before me, for rarely do we view confrontation in our society. It is our nature to speak softly and agree with those before us, and then to handle difficulties in a secret manner. When our auntie, who was a very beautiful woman with the long black curls, began to tear out her hair and rip her expensive pearls from her neck, I knew this was a serious matter. Finally, my mother calmed her enough to lead her to the sitting room for a cup of soothing tea. My sister gathered around the closed door and tried to hear their whispering. I kicked around the large clumps of hair with my toe and stooped to gather the large smooth pearls. I found myself with a fistful of pearls and placed them in an empty vase in the hallway for safekeeping. Mother guided our weeping auntie to her waiting black Mercedes. We all watched as the driver sped away with his inconsolable passenger. We never saw our auntie again, for she accompanied Uncle Saud and his encourage and trudged into exile. But our mother did advise us against feeling harsh towards our Uncle Faisal. She said that our auntie had uttered such words because she was in love with a kind and a generous man, but such a man does not necessarily make the best ruler. She told us that Uncle Faisal was leading our country into a stable and prosperous area, and by doing so he earned the wrath of those less capable. Although by Western standard my mother was uneducated, she was truly wise. Chapter 2. Family. My mother, encouraged by King Faisal's wife Ifat, managed to educate her daughters, despite my father's resistance. For many years, my father refused even to consider the possibility. My 5 older sisters received no schooling other than to memorize the Quran from a private tutor who came to our home. For 2 hours, 6 afternoons a week, they would repeat words after the Egyptian teachers. Fatima, a stern woman of about 45 years of age. She once asked my parents' permission to expand my sister's education to include science, history, and maths. Father responded with a firm no, and the recital of the Prophet's word, and his words alone, continued to ring throughout our villa. As the year passed, Father saw that many of the royal families were allowing their daughters to benefit of an education. With the coming of the great oil wealth, which relieved nearly all Saudi women, other than the Bedouin tribespeople and rural villages, from any type of work, inactivity, and boredom became a national problem. Members of the royal family are much wealthier than most Saudis. Yet the oil wealth brought servants from the far east and the other poor region into every home. All the children need to be stimulated, but my sister and I had little or nothing to do other than to play in our rooms or lounges in the women's garden. There was no way to go and little to do, for when I was a child, there was not even a zoo or a park in the city. Mother, weary of 5 energetic daughters, thought that school would relieve her while expanding her minds. Finally, Mother, with the of Auntie Effort wore father down to weak acceptance. And so it came to be that five youngest daughters of our family, including Sarah and myself, enjoyed a new age of reluctant acceptance of education for females. Our first classroom was in the home of a royal relative. Seven families of Al Saud clan employed a young woman from Abu Dhabi, a neighboring Arab city in the Emirates. Our small group of people, 16 in all, was known in those days as Kutub, a group method then popular for teaching girls. We gathered daily in the home of our royal cousin from 9 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Saturday to Thursday. It was there that my favorite sister Sarah first displayed her brilliance. She was much quicker than girls twice her age. The teacher even asked Sarah if she was a primary graduate and shook her head in the wonder when she learned that Sarah was not. Our instructor had been fortunate to have a modern thinking father who had sent her to England for an education. Because of her deformity, a clubfoot, she had found no one who would marry. So she chose a path of freedom and independence for herself. She smiled as she told us that her deformed foot was a gift from God to ensure that her mind did not become deformed too. Even though she lived in the home of our royal cousin, it was and still is unthinkable for a single woman to live alone in Saudi Arabia. She earned a salary and made her decision about life without outside influence. I liked her simply because she was kind and patient when I forgot to do my lessons. Unlike Sarah, I was not the scholarly type, and I was happy the teacher expressed little disappointment at my shortcoming. I was much more interested in drawings than in maths, and in singing than performing my prayer. Sarah sometimes pinched me when I misbehaved, but after I howled in distress and disrupted the whole class, she left me to my mischievous ways. Certainly, the instructor truly lived up to the name given her 27 years before, Sakina, which means tranquility in Arabic. Miss Sakina told mother that Sarah was the brightest student she had ever taught. After I jumped up and down and yelled, "What about me?" She thought for a long moment before answering. With a smile, she said, "And Sultana is certain to be famous." That evening at dinner, mother proudly passed on the remark about Sarah to father. Father, who was visibly pleased, smiled at Sarah. Mother beamed with pleasure, but then father cruelly asked how any daughter born of her valley could acquire their name. Nor did he credit mother with any contribution to the brilliance of Ali, who was at the top of his class at a modern secondary school in the city. Presumably, the intellectual achievement of her children were inherited solely from their father. Even today, I shudder with dismay while watching my older sister attempt to add or subtract. I say little prayers of gratitude to Auntie Ifat, for she changed the lives of so many Saudi women. In the summer of 1932, Uncle Faisal had traveled to Turkey, and while there, he had fallen in love with a unique young woman named Ifat al-Thunian. Hearing that the young Saudi prince was visiting Constantinople, the young Ifat and her mother approached him about distributed property that had belonged to her deceased father. The Thunians were originally Saudis but had been taken to Turkey by the Ottomans during their lengthy rule of the area. Smitten by Ifat's beauty, Faisal invited her and her mother to Saudi Arabia to sort out the misunderstanding of the property matter. Not only did he give her the property, he also married her. Later, he was to say it was the wisest decision of his life. My mother said Uncle Faisal had gone from woman to woman, like a man possessed, until he met Ifat. During the year of Uncle Faisal's reign, after became the driving force behind education for young girls. Without her efforts, the women in Arabia today would not be allowed in a classroom. I was in awe of her forceful character and declared I would grow up to be just like her. She even had the courage to hire an English nanny for her children, who, of all the royal brood, turned out to be the most unaffected by great wealth. Sadly, many of the royal cousins were swept away by the sudden rush of riches. My mother used to say that the Bedouin had survived the stark emptiness of the desert, but we would never survive the enormous wealth of the oil field. The quiet achievement of the mind and the pious religious belief of their father hold no appeal for the vast majority of the younger Al Saud. I believe that the children of this generation have decayed with the ease of their lives. and that their great fortune has deprived them of any ambitious or real satisfaction. Surely the weakness of our monarchy in Saudi Arabia is bound up in our addiction to extravagance. I fear it will be our undoing. Most of my childhood was spent traveling from one city to another in my land. The nomadic Bedouin blood flows in all Saudis, and as soon as we returned from one trip, discussions would ensue as to the next journey. We Saudis no longer have sheep to graze, but we cannot stop looking for greener pastures. Riyadh was the base of government, but none of Al Saud family particularly enjoyed the city. Their complaints never ended about the dreariness of the life in Riyadh. It was too hot and dry. The men of religion took themselves too seriously. The nights were too cold. Most of the family preferred Jeddah or Taif. Jeddah, with its ancient ports, was more open to change and moderation. There, we all breathed easier in the air of the sea. We generally spent the months from December to February in Jeddah. We would return to Riyadh for March, April, and May. The heat of the summer months would drive us to mountains of Taif from June to September. Then it was back to Riyadh for October and November. Of course, we spent the months of Ramzan and 2 weeks of Hajj in Makkah, our holy city. By the time I was 12 years old, in 1968, my father had become extremely wealthy. In spite of his wealth, he was one of the last extravagant Al Saud. But he did build each of his four families 4 palaces in Riyadh, Jeddah, Taif, and Spain. The palaces were exactly the same in each city, even to the color of carpets and furniture selected. My father hated change, and he wanted to feel as if he were in the same home even after a flight from city to city. I remember him telling my mother to purchase 4 each of every item, down to the children's underwear. He did not want the family to bother with packing suitcases. I found it eerie that when I entered my room in Jeddah or Taif, it was the same as my room in Riyadh, with the identical clothes hanging in identical wardrobes. My books and toys were purchased in 4, one of each item placed in each palace. My mother rarely complained, but when my father purchased 4 identical red Porsches from my brother Ali, who was only 14 at the time, she cried out that it was a shame, such waste with so many poor people in the world. When it came to Ali, though no expenses was spared. When he was 10 years old, Ali received his first gold Rolex watch. I was particularly distressed, for I had asked my father for a thick gold bracelet from the souk, and he had briskly turned aside my request. During the second week of Ali flaunting his Rolex, I saw that he had laid it on the table beside the pool. Overcome with jealousy, I took a rock and pounded the watch to pieces. For once, my mystery was not discovered, and it was with great pleasure that I saw my father reprimand Ali for being careless with his belongings. But of course, within a week or so, Ali was given another gold Rolex watch, and my childish resentfulness returned with a vengeance. My mother spoke to me often about my hatred for my brother. A wise woman, she saw the fire in my eyes even as I bore to the inevitable. As the youngest child of the family, I had been the most pampered of their daughters by my mother, sisters, and other relatives. Looking back, it is hard to deny that I was spoiled beyond belief. Because I was small for my age, in contrast with the rest of my sisters who were tall with large frames, I was treated as a baby throughout my childhood years. All of my sisters were quiet and restrained, as befitting Saudi princes. I was loud and unruly, caring little for my royal image. How must I have tried their patience? But even today, each of my sisters would spring to my defense at the first sign of danger. In sad contrast to my father, I represented the last of many disappointments. As a consequence, I spent my childhood trying to win his affection. Finally, I despaired of retaining his love and clamored after any attention, even if it were in the form of punishment for misdeeds. I calculated that if my father looked at me enough times, he would recognize my special traits and come to love his daughter, even as he loved Ali. As it turned out, my rowdy ways ensured that he would go from indifference to open dislike. My mother accepted the fact that the land in which we had been born was a place that is destined for misunderstandings between the sexes. Still a child with the world stretching before me, I had yet to reach that conclusion.
Looking back, I suppose Ali must have had good character traits along with the bad, but it was difficult for me to see past his one great defect. Ali was cruel. I watched him as he taunted the handicapped son of our gardener. The poor child had long arms and strangely shaped legs. Often, when Ali's boyhood friends came over for a visit, he would summon poor Sami and tell him to do his monkey walk. Ali never noticed the pathetic look on Sami's face or the tears that trickled down his cheeks. When Ali found baby kittens, he would lock them away from their mother and howl with glee as the mother cat tried in vain to reach them. No one in the household dared to chastise Ali, for our father saw no harm in Ali's cruel way. After particularly moving talk from my mother, I prayed about my feelings for Ali and decided to attempt the Saudi way of manipulation instead of confrontation with my brother. Besides, my mother used God's wishes as her platform, and using God is always an admirable formula for convincing children to change their action. Through my mother's eye, I finally saw that my present course would lead me down to a thorny path. My good intentions were squashed within the week by Ali's dastardly behavior. My sister and I found a tiny puppy that had evidently become separated from its mother. The puppy was whimpering from hunger.
Overcome with excitement at our find, we rushed about collecting dolls' bottle and warming goat's milk. My sister and I took turns with feedings. Within days, the puppy was bouncing and fat. We dressed him in our rags and even trained him to sit in our pram. While it is true that Muslims do not favor dogs, it is a rare person who can harm a baby animal of any species. Even our mother, a devout Muslim, smiled at the antics of the puppy. One afternoon, we were pushing Bassam, which means smiling face in Arabic, in a pram. Ali happened to walk by with his friends. Sensing his friends' excitement over our puppy, Ali decided that the puppy should be his. My sister and I screamed and fowled when he tried to take Bassam from our arms. Our father heard the commotion and he came from his study. When Ali told him that he wanted the puppy, our father instructed us to hand him over. Nothing we said or did would change our father's mind. Ali wanted the puppy, Ali got the puppy. Tears streamed down our faces as Ali gently walked away with Bassam tucked under his arm. The possibility for love of my brother was forever lost, and my hair solidified when I was told that Ali had soon tired of Bassam's whimpers, and on the way to visit friends had tossed the puppy out of the window of the moving car.
Chapter 3. My sister Sarah. I felt wretched for my favorite sister, Sarah was crying in mother's arms. She is the ninth living daughter of my parents, 3 years older than I. Only Ali's birth separated us. It was Sarah's 16th birthday and she should have been rejoicing, but mother had just relayed distressing news from father. Sarah had been dwelling since her menses 2 years earlier. The veil stamped her as a non-person, and she soon ceased to speak of her childhood dreams of greater accomplishment. She became distant from me. Her younger sister, who was as yet unconcerned with the institutional wailing, I was left longing for the remembered happiness of our shared childhood. It suddenly became apparent to me that happiness is realized only in the face of unhappiness, for I never knew we were so happy until Sarah's unhappiness stared me in the face. Sarah was lovely, much more beautiful than I or my sister. Her great beauty had become a curse, for many men had heard of Sarah's beauty through their mothers and sisters, and now wished to marry her. Sarah was tall and slim, and her skin creamy and white. Her huge brown eyes sparkled with the knowledge that all who saw her admired her beauty. Her long black hair was the envy of all sisters. In spite of her natural beauty, Sarah was genuinely sweet and loved by all who knew her. Unfortunately, not only did Sarah acquire the curse that comes with great beauty, she was also exceptionally bright. In our land, brilliance in a woman assures her future misery, for there is nowhere to focus her genius. Sarah wanted to study art in Italy and be the first to open an art gallery in Jeddah. She had been working towards that goal since she was 12 years old. Her room was cluttered with books of all the great masters. Sarah made my head swim with description of the magnificent art in Europe. Just before the wedding announcement, when I was secretly blundering through her room, I saw a list of the places she planned to visit in Florence, Venice, and Milan. Sadly, I knew that Sarah's dream would not come true. While it is true that most marriages in my land are guided by the hands of the older females of the families, in our family, father was the decision maker in all the matters. Long ago, he had decided that his most beautiful daughter would marry a man of great prominence and wealth. Now, the particular man he had chosen to marry his most desirable daughter was a member of a leading merchant family in Jeddah that had decided financial influence with our family. The groom was chosen solely because of past and future business deal. He was 62 years old, Sarah would be his third wife. Although she had never met the old man, he had heard of her great beauty from his female relatives and was eager for the wedding date to be set. Mother had tried to intervene on Sarah's behalf, but father, as was his way, responded without emotion to his daughter's tear. And now Sarah had heard she was to wed. Mother ordered me to leave the room, but her back was turned. I tricked her by making noises with my feet and slamming the door. I slid inside the open wardrobe door and wept silent tears as my sister cursed her father, our land, our culture. She cried so hard that I lost many of her words, but I heard her cry out that she was sure to be sacrificed like a lamb. My mother wept too, but she had no words of comfort for Sarah. For she knew her husband had the full right to dispose of their daughters in any marriage he liked. 6 of their 10 daughters were already married to men not of their choosing. Mother understood that the 4 remaining daughters would follow that darkness. There was no power on earth that could stop it. Mother heard my screaming in the wardrobe. She narrowed her eyes and shook her head when she saw me, but made no effort to make me move. She told me to bring cold towels, and then she turned her attention back to Sarah. When I returned, she placed the towel on Sarah's head and soothed her to sleep. She sat and watched her young daughter for many minutes, and finally she rose wearily to her feet. With a long, sad sigh, she took me by the hand and led me to the kitchen. Although it was not mealtime and the cook was napping, Mother prepared for me a plate of cake and a glass of cold milk. I was 13 but small for my age. She cuddled me in her lap for a long time. Unfortunately, Sarah's tears served only to harden father's heart. I overheard entreaties to him. She became so unbalanced in her grief that she accused her father of hating women. She spat out a verse of Buddha. Victory breeds hatred, for the conquered are unhappy. Father, his back rigid with anger, turned and walked away. Sarah wailed at his back that she would have been better off unborn, since her pain so outweighed her happiness. With an ugly voice, father responded by saying that her wedding date would be moved up to avoid stretching out her pain of anticipation. Father normally came to our villa once every fortnight. Men of the Muslim faith with 4 wives rotate their evenings so that each wife and family is given an equal amount of time. It is a serious situation when a man refuses to go to his wife and children, a form of punishment. Our villa was in such an uproar with Sarah's suffering that father instructed mother, who was his first and therefore his head wife, to inform his other 3 wives that he would rotate among their villas, but not ours. Before he left the villa, father curtly told mothers to cure her daughter of her feverish resentment and to guide her peacefully to her destiny, which in his word was that of a dutiful wife and good mother. I barely recall the wedding of my other sisters. I vaguely remember tears, but I was so young and the emotional trauma of marriage to a stranger had not yet penetrated my thoughts. But I can lose my eyes today and bring to mind every detail of the events that occurred in the months before Sarah's wedding, the wedding itself, and the sad events that unfolded in the weeks afterward. I held the family reputation of the difficult child, the daughter who most tried my parents' patience. Willful and reckless, I created havoc in our household. I was the one who poured sand into the motor of Ali's new Mercedes. I pinched money out of my father's wallet. I buried Ali's gold coin collection in the backyard. I released green snakes and ugly lizards from jars into the family pool as Ali lay sleeping on his plot. Sarah was the perfect daughter, with her quiet obedience, and had earned perfect marks for school work. Even though I loved her madly, I thought Sarah weak. But she surprised us all during the weeks prior to her wedding. Apparently she had a hidden strength, for she called her father's office daily and left messages for him that she was not going to marry. She even called the office of the man she was scheduled to marry and left a harsh message with his Indian secretary that she thought he was an old, disgusting man and that he should marry women, not girls. The Indian secretary obviously thought better of giving such a message to his employer, for seas did not part and mountains failed to erupt. Determined, Sarah called back and asked to speak to the man himself. He was not in his office. Sarah was informed that he would be in Paris for a few weeks. Further, fearing Sarah's behavior had our telephones disconnected. Sarah was confined to her room. My sister's reality loomed ahead. The day of wedding arrived. The week the weeks of fretful mourning had done nothing to diminish Sarah's beauty. If anything, she appeared more beautiful, almost translucent, a heavenly creature not made for this world. Because of weight loss, her dark eyes dominated her face, and her features seemed chiseled. There was no end to Sarah's eyes, and I could see into her soul through her enormous black. I saw fear there. Our older sister, various female cousins, and aunties arrived early on the morning of the wedding to prepare the bride for the groom. My unwanted presence scared the attention of the women, for I sat like a stone in the corner of the large dressing room that had been converted into a preparation room for the bride. No less than 15 women were attending to the various wedding details. The first ceremony, the halwa, was performed by our mother and her oldest auntie. All of Sarah's body hair had to be removed, except her eyebrows and head hair. A special mixture of sugar, rose water, and lemon juice that would be spread over her body was now boiling over a low fire in the kitchen. The sweet paste had dried on her body, it would be removed, and Sarah's body hair would be rubbed off with the sticky mixture. The aroma was sweet smelling, but Sarah's yelps of pain made me shudder in fear. The henna was prepared for the final rings through Sarah's luxuriant curls. Her hair would now shine with beautiful highlights. Her nails were painted bright red, the color of blood, I reflected gloomily. The pale pink lacy wedding gown hung from the doorway. The requisite diamond necklace with matching bracelet and earrings were gathered in a pile on the dressing table. Although sent over weeks ago as a gift from the groom, the jewels remained unnoticed and untouched by Sarah. When a Saudi bride is happy, the preparation room is filled with the sounds of laughter and eager anticipation. For Sarah's wedding, the mood was somber. Her tender might as well have been preparing her body for the grave. Everyone spoke in whispers. There was no response from Sarah. I found her oddly subdued in view of her spirited reactions during the past few weeks. Later I understood her trance-like state. Father, concerned that Sarah would humiliate the family name by voicing her objection or even insulting the groom, had instructed one of the Pakistani palace doctors to inject her with powerful tranquilizer throughout the day. Later we discovered that the same doctor had given the groom the tranquilizer in the form of pills for Sarah. The groom was told that Sarah was highly nervous with excitement over the wedding, and the medicines was prescribed for a queasy stomach. Since the groom had never met Sarah, in the coming days he must have assumed that she was an unusually quiet and docile young woman. But then again, many old men in my country marry young girls. I'm sure they are accustomed to the tattle of their young brides. The beating of drums signaled the arrival of guests. At last the woman would finish with Sarah. This delicate dress was slipped over her head, the zipper was raised, and the pink slippers were placed on her feet. My mother fastened the diamond necklace around her neck. I loudly announced, "Necklace might as well be a noose." One of my aunties thumped me on my head and another twisted my ear. There was no sound from Sarah. We all gazed at her in awed silence. We knew no bride could be more beautiful. A huge tent had been erected in the backyard for the ceremony. The garden was inundated with flowers sent from Holland, with thousands of overhanging colored lights. The grounds were spectacular, taking the splendor I forgot for a few moments the grimness of the situation. The tent was already overflowing with guests. Women from the royal family, literally weighed down by diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, were sharing a social event with commoners, a rare occasion. Lower classes of Saudi women are allowed to view our wedding so long as they remain veiled and do not socialize with the royals. One of my friends told me that sometimes men wail and join these women so that they can view our forbidden faces. Supposedly, all the male guests were being entertained at a major hotel in the city, enjoying the same socializing as these women guests, talking, dancing, and eating. At wedding in Saudi Arabia, men celebrate at one location and women at another. The only men allowed at the women's celebration are the groom, his father, the father of the bride, and a religious man to perform the short ceremony. In this case, the groom's father was deceased, so only our father would accompany the groom when the time right for him to claim his bride. Suddenly, the slaves and the servants began to uncover the food. There was a rush toward the feast. The veiled ones were the first to assault the food. These poor women were cramming food under their veils and into their mouths. Other guests began to sample smoked salmon from Norway, Russian caviar, quail eggs, and other gourmet delicacies. Four large tables swayed with the weight of the food. Appetizers were on the left, main course in the middle, desserts to the right, and off to the side were the liquid refreshments. No alcohol was visible, of course, but many of the royal women carried small jewel flasks in their handbags. Now and then, giggling, they would repair to the washrooms for a small sip. Belly dancers from Egypt moved to the center of the tent. The crowd of women of all the ages quieted and watched the dancers' movement with mixed interest. This was my favorite part of the wedding, but most of the women seemed uncomfortable with the erotic display. We Saudis take ourselves too seriously and look on fun and laughter with suspicion. But I was startled when one of my older aunties leaped into the crowd and joined in the swaying of the belly dancer. She was amazingly skilled, but I heard the mumble of disapproval from several of my relatives. Once again, the sound of drums filled in the air, and I knew it was time for Sarah to appear. All the guests looked to the villa entrance in expectations. It was not long before the doors opened wide, and Sarah, accompanied by her mother on the side and an aunt on the other, was escorted to the garden. Since I lost her, my sister, a cloud-like pink veil had been draped over her face, held in place by a pink pearl tiara. The sheer veil served only to enhance her remarkable beauty. There was a low hum as the guests whispered their approval of her appropriately tortured demeanor. After all, a young virgin bride should look the part, frightened to the core of her being. Dozens of female relatives followed behind, filling the air with the desert sound of excitement and celebration, the high-pitched trill which the women produced by flicking their tongues on the roofs of their mouth. Other women joined in with shrill cries. Sarah stumbled but was kept upright by her mother. Soon my father and the groom made their appearance. I knew the groom was older than my father, but I was decidedly revolted by my first sight of him. He looked ancient to my young eyes, and I thought he most resembled a weasel. I cringed at the thought of him physically touching my shy and sensitive sister. The groom wore a leading smirk as he lifted my sister's veil. She was too drugged to react and stood motionless, facing her new master. The royal marriage ceremony had been performed weeks prior to the wedding. No women had been present. Only men had participated in that ceremony, for it was the signing of dowry agreement in exchange of legal papers. Today the few words would be spoken that would complete the marriage rite. The religious man looked at father as he spoke the token words that Sarah was now married to the groom in exchange for the agreed upon dowry. Then he glanced at the groom, who in response replied that he accepted Sarah as his wife and that she, from this time forward, would be under his care and protection. None of the men looked at Sarah at any time during the ceremony. Reading passage from the Quran, the man of the religion then blessed my sister's marriage. All at once, the women began to shriek and ululate. Sarah was married. The man looked on, pleased and smiling. As Sarah stood motionless, the groom removed a small pouch from the pocket of his soul and tossed gold coins to the guest. I shivered as I watched him smugly accept their congratulations on his marriage to such a beautiful woman. He took my sister by the arm and hurriedly began to lead her away. Sarah's eye locked onto mine as she passed my way. I knew someone should help her, but I felt certain no one would. Quite suddenly, I remembered Sarah's word to father: victory breeds hatred, for the conquered are unhappy. In my grieving mind, I found no consolation in the knowledge that the groom would never know happiness in such a bitterly unjust union. There could not be punishment enough for him. Chapter 4. Divorce. Father forbade us from visiting Sarah for the first 3 months of her marriage. She needed time to adjust her new life and responsibilities, he said, and the sight of her family would serve only to inflame her desire to return to a useless life of dreams. Our vocal distress over her bondage drew nothing more than passionless notes. Sarah, in father's view, was doing what women are born to do: serve and pleasure the male and produce his children. Sarah had taken nothing from her room. Perhaps she understood that the presence of her books and other objects of delight would only make her present actuality more bleak. To me, it was as if Sarah were dead. Her absence left a black, gaping hole in my life. I mourned her passing by, spending long hours in her room with her possessions. I began to take an interest in Sarah's hobbies and felt myself assuming parts of her personality. I read her diary, and her dreams felt as if they were my own. I wept with the fury of one who questions the wisdom of a God who allows evil to conquest the innocent. My mother instructed that Sarah's door be locked after she found me in Sarah's bed, in her nightdress, reading her art book. We did not have to suffer through father's imposed 3 months waiting period to see Sarah. 5 weeks after her wedding, she attempted suicide. I was in the garden, talking with some of the animals in our newly constructed private zoo, when suddenly Umar tripped completely out of his sandals in his haste to enter the front gate. His skin, which was usually deep bronze, looked pasty white. He brushed off his soap and beat the sand out of his sandal on the side of the wall. He told me to run and find my mother. Mother had a certain sense about her children, and when she saw Umar, she asked him what was wrong with Sarah. No Arabs will tell a relative the truth when a family member is sick, dying, or dead. We are people who simply cannot handle being the bearer of bad tidings. If a child dies, the unlucky person who receives the task of notifying the family will begin by saying the child is not feeling well. After questioning, the person will acknowledge that the trip to the doctor is necessary, and then later admit that the child is in hospital. After intense pleas from the family member for additional information, the messenger will finally say the illness is serious and the family has best prepare for a journey to the bedside of the loved one. Later, the person will painfully admit that the loved one's life is in a grave danger. It might take a period of several hours to discover the exact degree of seriousness. But no one will ever admit to the death of a loved one. The furthest an Arab will go in delivering bad news is to prepare the family for worse news from the doctor. Umar told my mother that Sarah had eaten some rotten meat and was now in a private clinic in Jeddah. Father was sending mother on a private plane within the hour. Mother tightened her lips and turned in rush to gather her abaya and veil. I screamed and clung to mother so that she relented and allowed me to go, with the promise that I would not make a scene in the clinic if Sarah were desperately ill. I promised and ran to Sarah's room, pounding and kicking at the locked door until one of the servants found the key. I wanted to take Sarah's favorite art book to her. Umar drove us to father's office since he had forgotten to collect our travel papers. In Saudi Arabia, a man must write a letter granting permission for the females in his family to travel. Without the papers, we might be stopped at the custom office and prevented from boarding the plane. Father also sent our passports since, as he told mother, it might be necessary for us to take Sarah to London for treatment. Rotten meat, London. I knew what was rotten, and it was father's story. I thought my sister must surely be dead. We flew to Jeddah in a small private plane. The ride was smooth, but the atmosphere inside the cabin was clouded with tension. My mother said little and kept her eyes shut for most of the flight. Only a few years before, she had taken her first car ride. Now I saw her lips moving, and I know that double prayers were being spared to God. Mother was praying first for Sarah to be alive, and second for the plane to take us safely to Sarah. The pilot and co-pilot were American, and I was immediately attracted to their open, friendly manner. They asked me if I wanted to sit in the cockpit. Mother nodded a reluctant permission to me, frenzied foot stamping and arm flapping. I had never sat in the cockpit before. Ali always sat in the cockpit. At first, I was frightened at the sight of the open sky, and the plane felt like a tie between us and the hard earth. I gave a small cry of alarm and backed away. John, the larger of the two Americans, gave me a reassuring smile and patiently explained the function of the various buttons and gadgets. To my surprise, I found myself leaning over his shoulder, completely at ease. For one of the few occasions in my young life, I felt calm and comfortable in the presence of men. Sadly, I was fearful of my father and detested Ali and my other half-brother. It was a strange feeling, yet I felt intoxicated with the knowledge that men whom I had been brought up to think as gods could be so ordinary and non-threatening. This was something new to think about.
When I looked out of the window of the plane, I understood what grips the heart of the eagle as it soars overhead, and I experienced a wonderful sense of freedom. My thoughts drifted to Sarah and the shocking realization that birds and beasts were freer than my sister. I made a vow to myself that I would be the master of my life, no matter what action I would have to take or pain I would have to endure. I joined my mother for the landing of the plane. She gathered me into her loving arms and held me tenderly as the plane taxied to the terminal. She was veiled, but I knew her every expression and I heard her breathe a long, tortured sigh. I said goodbye to the kind Americans. I hoped they would fly us back to Riyadh, for I felt a camaraderie with the two men who had lent such importance to a child's foolish and feverish question. Arriving at a clinic, we heard wails and crying as we walked down the long corridor. Mother stepped up her pace and gripped my hand so tightly I wanted to complain. Sarah was alive but barely. We were distraught to discover that she had tried to take her life by placing her head in the gas oven. She was very quiet, deathly pale. Her husband was not there, but he had sent over his mother. Now, in a loud voice, the old woman began to scold Sarah harshly for embarrassing her son and his family. She was a mean and old hag. I wanted to scratch her face and see her run, but I remembered my promise to mother. Instead, I stood barely breathing from anger, patting Sarah's smooth, still hand. Mother threw her veil over her head and faced the old woman. She had fretted over many possibilities, but the discovery that her daughter had attempted suicide was unexpected and devastating. When she turned in a cold fury to the husband's mother, I wanted to stamp and cheer. She stopped the woman cold when she asked what her son had done to make a young girl want to take her life. She ordered her to leave Sarah's bedside, for this was no place for the ungodly. The old woman left without replacing her veil. We could hear her voice rise in anger as she cried out to God for sympathy. Mother turned to me and saw my admiring smile. I was awed by her anger, and for a brief shining moment I felt God would not desert us. Sarah would be saved, but I knew Mother's life would be one of misery when Father heard of her words. Knowing Father, he would be angry, not sympathetic, towards Sarah for her desperate act, and he was sure to be furious with Mother for defending her daughter. In Saudi Arabia, the elderly are truly revered. No matter what they do or say or how they behave, no one dares confront someone of age. When she faced the old woman, my mother had been a tigress, protecting her young. My heart felt as though it would burst from pride at her courage. After 3 days, without calling once, Sarah's husband came into the clinic to claim his property. By the time he arrived, Mother had discovered the source of Sarah's agony. She confronted her son-in-law with contempt. Sarah's new husband was sadistic. He had subjected my sister to sickening sexual brutality until she felt her only escape was death. Even Father was repelled when he heard of his daughter's suffering, but Father agreed with his son-in-law that a wife belonged with her husband. Sarah's husband promised Father that his relation with her would conform to a life of normalcy. Mother's hand trembled and her mouth stretched in a howl when Father told her of his decision. Sarah began to weep and tried to leave the bed, saying she did not wish to live. She threatened to slit her wrist if forced to return to her husband. Mother stood over her daughter like a mountain and for the first time in her life defied her husband. She told him that Sarah would never return to the house of a monster, and that she, Mother, would go to the king and the council of religious men with the story, and neither would allow such a matter to continue. Father threatened Mother with divorce. She stood fast and told him to do whatever he had to do, but her daughter would not return to swim in such evil. Father stood unblinkingly. He probably realized that in all likelihood Sarah would be forced by the men of religion to return to her husband. If the past were any precedent, they would advise the husband to deal with his wife in a manner spelled out by the Quran, and then they would turn their backs on such a disagreeable situation. Father stood staring, analyzing Mother's resolve, askance at her apparent resolution, and waiting to avoid public interference in family matter. For once in their married life, he gave in. Since we were of the royal family and he did not wish to serve his child with my father, the husband reluctantly agreed to divorce Sarah. Islam gives the right of divorce to men without any question of motive. Yet it is very difficult for women to divorce her husband. Had Sarah been forced to file for the separation, many difficulties would have arisen. The religious authorities might have ruled, "You might dislike a thing which Allah has meant for your own good," and force Sarah to remain with her husband. But Sarah's husband relented and uttered the words, "I divorce you," 3 times in the presence of 2 male witnesses. The divorce was final in a matter of moments. Sarah was free. She returned to her home. Every upheaval is a transition. My young world was transformed by Sarah's wedding, attempted suicide, and divorce. Fresh thoughts and ideas began to grow in my mind. I was never to think as a child again. For hours, I pondered the primitive traditions surrounding marriage in my land. Numerous factors determined the marriageability of a girl in Saudi Arabia. Her family name, her family fortune, her lack of deformities, and her beauty. Social dating is taboo, so a man must depend on his eagle-eyed mother and sister constantly to seek out proper matches for him. Even after the promise to marry is made and the date is set, rarely does a girl meet her future husband prior to the wedding. Though there are times when individual families allow the exchange of. If a girl is of a good family and without deformity, she will enjoy a number of marriage proposals. If she is a beauty, man will send their mothers or father to beg for marriage, for beauty is a great commodity for women in Saudi Arabia. Of course, no scandal can mar the reputation of the beauty of her desirability will fade. Such a girl will find herself married as a third or fourth wife to an old man in a faraway village. Many Saudi men leave the final decision on the marriage of their daughters to their wives, knowing they will make the best match possible for them. Still, often the mother too will insist upon an unwanted marriage even as her daughter protests. After all, she herself had married a man she feared and her life had progressed without anticipated horror or pain. Love and affection do not last. The mother will caution her daughter. It is best to marry into a family that they know. And then there are men, such as my father, who base their decision concerning their daughter's marriage upon possible personal or economic gain through the union. And there is no higher authority to question the verdict. Sarah, with all her beauty, intelligence, and childhood dreams, in the end was no more than a pawn in my father's scheme for wealth. This intimate view of my beloved sister predicament filled me with a new resolve. It was my thought that we women should have a voice in the final decision on issues that would alter our lives forever. From this time I began to live, breathe, and fought for the rights of women in my country, so that we could live with the dignity and personal fulfillment that are the right of man, that are birthright of a man. Chapter 5. Ali. A few months after Sarah's return, my older sister Nora convinced father that Sarah and I needed to see the world outside the Saudi Arabia. None of us had been able to rouse Sarah from her chronic depression, and Nora thought a trip would be just the right medicine. As to the extent of my travels, I had visited Spain twice, but I had been so young my recollections did not count. Nora, married to one of our first king's grandson, pleased father with her marriage and her calm, placid outlook on life. She did as she was told, no question asked. Father actually grew fond of her as the years passed, for few of his daughters had Nora's complacent quality. Since Sarah's divorce, father held Nora up as a constant reminder to the rest of his daughters. She had married a stranger and her marriage had proved to be satisfactory. Of course, the real reason was that her husband was considerate and attentive. In father's mind, Sarah had obviously provoked her husband into criminal behavior. It is never the fault of the man in the Middle East. Even if he murders his wife, the man will state valid reason for his action, which will be accepted by other men without question. In my own country, I have seen newspaper prints articles that honor a man for executing his wife or daughter for the crime of indecent behavior. The mere suspicion of sexual misconduct, such as kissing, can bring death to a young girl. In addition, public congratulations are given from the man of religion for the father's notable act of upholding the commands of the Prophet. Nora and Ahmed were in the midst of constructing a palace, and Nora wanted to travel to Europe to purchase Italian furnishing. On the way, we were to stop off in Egypt so that Nora's young children would view the pyramids. Father, with 22 daughters from our four wives, was often overheard muttering, "Women are a man's curse." It did not help his attitude that his younger daughters were in a kind of rebellion against the absolute rule of man. Our talk and actions were unprecedented and unappreciated. Knowing full well we would never reach the heights we desired, our talk alone was a victory of sorts. For no Saudi women had ever approached the topics we discussed with such great abandon. Nora wanted mother to go abroad with us, but mother had been strangely quiet since Sarah's return. It was as if her one great rebellion against father's rule had drained her life's blood. But she encouraged the trip, for she wanted Sarah to see Italy. She thought I was too young and should stay at home, but as usual, a temper tantrum accomplished the result I wanted. Sarah showed little interest even in the possibility of seeing the artistic wonders of Italy, but I was out of control with happiness. My joy was shattered by Ali's smug announcement that he was going with us. Father thought I needed a chaperone. In an instant, I lost my mind at the thought of Ali's treacherous presence ruining my vacation, and I was determined to insult him in the worst way. I grabbed his new gutra which is headdress, an eagle, black cord that rests on the top of the gutra, and raced through the house to my bathroom. I had no notion of what I was going to do with them, but a Saudi man is highly offended if anyone even touches his headdress. I felt an urge to hurt Ali as quickly as possible. When Ali followed, shouting that he would tell father, I slammed the bathroom door on him. Since he was wearing sandals, Ali's big toe was broken and his hand was bruised. From his shouts and moans, the servants thought I was killing him. No one came to Ali's rescue though. I don't know what came over me, perhaps the sound of Big Willie groaning and begging for sympathy, but I flushed his headdress down the toilet. The girl would not flush even as I frantically pushed it with the plunger. The sodden cord became stuck in the toilet. When Ali saw that I had done, he lunged for me. We were struggling on the floor when I got better of him by pulling and twisting his broken toe. Mother, hearing Ali scream of agony, intervened and saved him from my years of pent-up wrath. I knew I was in big trouble. I rationalized that my situation could not be any worse. So when my mother and Umar took Ali to the clinic to get his broken toe bandaged, I crept into his room and gathered up his secret hoard of treasure that were forbidden by both her religion and our country. These treasures were the usual object that all young boys collect the world over, but their possession is a serious offense under the law of religion in Arabia. Long before I had located Ali's collection of Playboy, Penthouse, and other similar magazines. Recently, I had discovered a new collection of slides. Curious, I had taken them to my bedroom. Perplexed, I viewed them on the slide projector. Naked men and women were doing all kinds of strange things. One group of pictures even showed animals with women. Ali had obviously lent them to other boys on occasion, for he had clearly printed his name on every forbidden article. I was too innocent at the time to know exactly what it all meant, but I knew these treasures were bad because he had always kept his secret cachet stacked in the same old tattered box labeled school notes. I was very familiar with his belongings, having sorted through his stuff for years. I carefully removed every magazine along with the slides. I also found 7 miniature bottles of alcohol that Ali had brought home after a weekend trip to Bahrain. I smiled at my plan as I shoved everything in a bag. In Saudi Arabia, mosques are built in a very neighborhood, for the government has placed top priority on providing a mosque within walking distance of every Muslim. With prayers to be offered 5 times a day, it is more convenient to complete all the prayers if a man is short distance from the mosque. Even though prayers can be given at any location so long as person face Makkah, it is thought that access to a mosque is preferable. Living in one of the wealthiest districts, we were served by a huge mosque made of white obsolete marble. Since it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I knew that noon prayers were over. It would be safe to carry out my plan without being seen. Even the men of religion nap in the hot climate of living in one of I opened the mosque door with dread and peeped in carefully before entering. Not yet veiled, I thought perhaps my presence would invite little curiosity. I already had my story ready in the event I was caught. If questioned, I would say I was hunting my new kitten that had wandered on the mosque grounds. Surprising, the mosque was cool and inviting. I had never been inside the huge building, but I had followed my father and Ali to prayers many times. From the age of 6, Ali had been encouraged to perform the 5 daily prayers. I felt my breast sharpen as I recalled the hurt I had felt as I watched my father hold Ali's hand and led him proudly through the grand entrance of the mosque, always leaving a lowly female at the side of the road to stare after them in a sorrow and anger. Women are forbidden entry into mosque in my country, even though Prophet Muhammad did not forbid women to pray publicly in the mosque. He did say that it was best for them to pray in the privacy of their homes. As a result, no female in Saudi Arabia has ever been allowed inside a mosque. No one was around. I hurriedly walked across the marble floor. The clicking of my sandals sounded loud and strange. I placed the bag containing Ali's forbidden article in the stairwell leading to the balcony that contains the loudspeaker which broadcasts Prophet Muhammad ﷺ words throughout the RCT 5 times a day. Just thinking of the intensity of the appeal of the muezzin, the criers who call the faithful to pray, I began to feel guilty about my adventure. Then I remember Ali's furious make as he told me that father would have me flogged and that he, Ali, would request the pleasure of beating me. I walked back home with a satisfied grin. Let Ali get out of this one. That night, before father came home from the office, 3 mutawas, religious men, arrived at our gate. I and 3 of our Filipino servants peered through one of the upstairs windows as we watched them shout at Umar and gesture wildly at the heaven, and then towards some books and magazines which they obviously held in distaste. I wanted to laugh but kept my face straight and serious. All foreigners and most Saudis are frightened of the mutwas for they have much power and they watch everyone for sign of weakness. Even members of the royal family try to avoid their attention. 2 weeks earlier, one of our Filipino maids had inflamed some mutwas by wearing a knee-length skirt in the soul. A group of religious men struck her with a stick and sprayed her uncovered legs with red paint. While the government of Saudi Arabia does not allow tourists to enter our country, there are many women who work as nurse secretaries and domestic help in our major cities. Many of these women feel the wrath of those who speak God's words yet despise those of our sex. If a woman is so bold as to defy our tradition by exposing uncovered arms or legs, she runs the risk of being struck and sprayed with paint. This maid had soaked her legs in paint remover, but they were still red and raw looking. She was convinced that somehow the religious police had traced her to her residence and now they had come to take her to gaol. She ran to hide under my bed. I wanted to tell her the nature of their visit, but my secret had to be guarded, even from Filipino servants. Umar was absolutely pallid when he came into the villa screaming for Ali. I saw Ali scuffling down the hallway, gingerly walking with the top of his right foot high in the air while balancing on his heel. I followed in and gathered with Mother and Ali in the sitting room where Umar was on the phone, calling father at his office. The mutwas had left, ensuring Umar with sample of the incriminating contraband, one magazine, several slides, and one miniature bottle of liquor. The rest they kept as evidence of Ali's guilt. I glanced at Ali and saw his face drain of blood when he saw his secret treasure spread out in disarray on Umar's lap. Catching sight of me, Umar asked me to leave the room, but I clung to my mother's skirt and she patted me on the head. Mother must have hated the way Umar bossed her children and she looked defiantly in his eyes. He decided to ignore me. He told Ali to sit down, that father was on his way home and the mutwas had gone to get the police. Ali was going to be arrested, he announced with booming certainty. The silence in the room was like the calm before a tempest. For a short moment I was very frightened, then Ali regained his composure and practically spat at Umar, declaring, "They cannot arrest me. I am a prince. Those religious fanatics are nothing more than pesky mosquitoes at my ankle." The sudden thought came to me that goal might do good, Ali. The squealing of father's brake signaled his arrival. Rushing into the room, barely controlling his anger, he picked up the forbidden article one by one. When he saw the magazine, he looked hard at Ali. He threw the whiskey aside with contempt, for all the prince have liquor in their home. But when father held the slide up to the lamplight, he screamed for mother and me to leave the room. We could hear him striking Ali with his hand. All in all, it had been a bad day for Ali. The mutwas must have thought better of calling the police to arrest one of the royal sons, for they returned in a few hours with little besides pious fury leading their way. But even father had a difficult time with mutwas in excusing the slide of women copulating with animals. The year was 1968 and King Faisal was not as tolerant with the misdeed of the young prince as he had been his elder brother Saud. The mutwas felt they were in a position of power for both. They and father knew that his uncle the king would be outraged if the contents of the slides became common knowledge. The fear of the mutwas were well known regarding the present course of modern land. King Faisal constantly cautioned his brother and his cousin to control their children to avoid the wrath of the religious man upon the heads of the royal man who ruled. The king assured the religious elder that he was leading our country into needing modernization, not degenerate westernization. The best, not the worst, of the West. The mutwas saw proof of the decadent Western behavior of the royals. Ali's slight collection did nothing to put their minds at ease about the whispered decadence of the royal family. We heard the mutwas argue long into the night over an appropriate punishment for the son of the prince. Ali was lucky to be a member of the family of Al Saud. The mutwas knew that unless the king gave his approval, no royal prince would be charged in the country's court system. Rarely, if ever, did such an event occur, but if Ali had been a member of a common Saudi family or a member of the foreign community, he would have been ordered to serve a long prison sentence. Our family was all too familiar with the sad story of the brother of one of our Filipino drivers. 4 years ago, the brother who worked for an Italian construction film in Riyadh had been arrested for possessing a pornographic film. The poor man was now serving a 7-year prison sentence. Not only was he languishing in prison, but he was also ordered to endure 10 lashes every Friday. Our driver who visited his brother every Saturday wept as he told Ali that every time he saw his poor brother, the man was black from his neck to his toe from the lashing of the previous day. He feared his brother would not live out the Unfortunately for Ali, his guilt was established without a doubt. His name was boldly printed on every forbidden item. And then a compromise of sorts was made. Father gave a huge sum of money to the mosque, and Ali had to be present for prayers 5 times each day to appease the man of God along with God himself. The mutwas knew that a few of the younger royal princes had ordered to go to the prayer at all, and that such a punishment would be especially irksome to Ali. He was told he would have to show his face to the head mutwa in our mosque at every prayer for the next 12 months. His only excuse would be if he were out of the city. Since Ali generally slept until 9 o'clock, he frowned at the mere thought of the sunrise prayer. In addition, he had to write 1,000 times on a legal book, God is great, and I have displeased him by running after the corrupt and immoral ways of the godless West. As a final condition, Ali was told he would have to reveal the name of the person who had supplied him with the slides and magazines. As it was, Ali had slipped in the magazine from trips abroad since a prince is ushered through custom with only a courtesy glance. But a veteran he had befriended at a party had sold him the slides, and Ali, eager for a foreign villain to take the pressure off him, happily supplied the mutwas with the veteran name and work address. We would later learn that the man had been arrested, flogged, and deported. I felt terrible. My stupid prank had disgraced my entire family with a stinging humiliation. I did not think the lesson would harm Ali, but I knew my parents had been affected and other innocent people would be injured. Also, I am ashamed to admit I was petrified that my guilt would be discovered. I pray to God that if He would let me escape capture this one, from that day forward I would be a perfect child. Umar led me mutwas out of our grounds. Mother and I waited for father and Ali to return to the family sitting room. Father was breathing loudly and gripped Ali by his upper arm, pushing him towards the stairway. Ali looked my way and our eyes met. A moment, a flash of realization, and I understood that he had concluded I was the guilty party. Sadly, I saw that he looked more hurt than angry. I began to sob, for I felt the weight of the terrible deed I had committed. Father looked at me in pity, then he showed Ali and screamed that he had upset the entire family, including the innocent children. For the first time in my life, my father came and held me in his arm and told me not to worry. I was now truly miserable. The touch that I had been longing for all my life now felt barren, and the joy I had so often imagined was destroyed in the elusive pride so wrongly taken. My misdeed had accomplished my target, however. No mention was ever made of Ali's broken toe or the toilet clogged with Ali's headdress. One sin had so outweighed the other that they ended up cancelling each other out. Chapter 6. The Trip. Despite the recent family turmoil, the trip to Italy and Egypt was still planned, but my heart was no longer joyful. I organized my case and made a list as I watched Ali wearily trudge by my bedroom door. In the past, Ali had given me little thought. I was fond as a girl, someone to interrupt noise or push about occasionally. A person of little word. He looked at me differently now, for he had made the surprising discovery that I, a lowly female and the youngest member of the family, was a dangerous and worthy opponent. On the day of our departure, 6 limousines were needed to transport us to the airport. 11 of us were traveling for 4 weeks. Nora and Ahmed, with 3 of their 5 children, 2 of their Filipino maids, Sarah and myself, and Ali and his friend Hadi. 2 years older than Ali, Hadi was a student at the religious institute, a boys' school in Riyadh for those young men who aspired to become mutawaz. Hadi impressed adults by quoting the Quran and acting very piously in their presence. My father felt confident that Hadi would have a good influence on his children. To those who would listen, Hadi loudly expressed his viewpoint that all women should be confined to the home. He told Ali that women were the cause of all evil on earth. I could tell it was going to be a pleasant and enjoyable trip with both Ali and Hadi around. Mother did not accompany us to the airport. For the past few days, she had been listless and sad. I assumed Ali's antics had worried her. She said her farewells in the garden and waved us off from the front gate. She was veiled, but I knew tears were falling on her face. Sometimes was a mess with Mother. I felt, but I had no time to dwell on the possibility as the prospect of this exciting trip lay ahead of us. Ahmed had recently purchased a new plane, so our flight was strictly a family affair. I looked to see if the 2 Americans who had flown Mother and me to Jeddah were piloting. Disappointed, I saw they were not. 2 British pilots were in the cockpit and they looked friendly enough. The royal family hired a large number of American and British citizens as private pilots. Ahmed conferred with the 2 men while Nora and the maid settled in with her 3 little ones. Sarah, and her veil now removed, was already bundled in a blanket, clutching her precious books. Hadi looked with distaste at her uncovered face and whispered angrily to Ali, who in turn ordered Sarah to replace her veil until we left Saudi Arabia.
Sarah told Ali she could not see to read through the thick fiber, and if he were smart, he would shut his ugly mouth. Even before we had left the ground, there was already a family squabble. I tried to stamp on Ali's sore toe but missed, and Ali took a swipe at my head. I ducked, and he missed. Ahmed, as the oldest male authority figure, shouted at everybody to sit down and be quiet. He and Nora exchanged a look that let me know they were already rethinking the wisdom of their generous invitation. The three holiest spots in Islam are Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Mecca is the city that captures the heart of more than 1 billion Muslims scattered all over the globe. For it was there that God revealed His will to His Prophet Muhammad. The foundation of our religious life are 5 ritual obligations called the pillars of religion. One of these obligations requires that every Muslim with the financial ability must attend Hajj. No good Muslim feels complete without making the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in his lifetime. Our second holiest city, Medina, considered the city of the Prophet, is the place of Muhammad's burial. And Jerusalem is our third holiest city. It was in Jerusalem that Muhammad was taken up by God to heaven on the dome of the rock. Muslims weep bitter tears at the mansion of Jerusalem, for it is a city now occupied and no longer free and open to our people. If Makkah, Medina, and Jerusalem are Muslims' spiritual fountainhead, then Cairo is the crowning glory of Muslim self-esteem. Cairo represents 50 centuries of titanic duration and presents Arab with the marvel of one of the greatest civilizations to appear on the earth. Egypt is a source of great pride for all the Arabs. The might, wealth, and accomplishments of the ancient Egyptians make the oil wealth of the modern Gulf Arabs seem puny and inconsequential. It was in Cairo, that city bursting with life from the beginning of time, that I became a woman. In the Arab culture, with so much importance attached to the change from girlhood to womanhood, every young girl awaits with a combination of dread and deep satisfaction the sight of her first blood. When my Western women friends tell me that they did not know what was happening to them when their first blood appeared, and that they were convinced they were dying, I am struck dumb with surprise. The coming of women's menses is a source of easy conversation in the world. Suddenly, at that moment, a child is transformed into an adult. There is no going back to that warm cocoon of childhood innocence. In Saudi Arabia, the appearance of the first menses means that it is time to select the first veil and abaya with the greatest of care. Even the shopkeepers, Muslim men from India or Pakistan, inquire with ease and respect as to the time the girl child became a woman. In all seriousness, the shopkeeper will smile indulgently and proceed to select the abaya and veil that will show the child to her greatest advantage. Even though the only color for a veil is black, there are many possibilities for fabric selection and weight of material. The veil can be of a thin material, giving the world a shadowy glimpse of the forbidden face. A medium weight fabric is more practical, for one can see through the gauzy cloth without the rude glances or sharp remarks from the keepers of the faith. If a woman chooses a traditional thick black fabric, no man can imagine her features in their facial mask that refuses to move with the strongest of breezes. Of course, this selection makes it impossible to examine jewelry in the gold soap or to see speeding cars after dusk. In addition to this traditional heavy veil, some of the conservative women choose to wear black gloves and thick black stockings so that no hint of flesh is visible to the world. For women with a need to express their individuality and fashion sense, there are ways to avoid that endless sea of conformity in dress through creative design. Many purchase scarves with jewel decoration, and the movement of trinkets turns the head of the most men. Expensive, eye-catching decorations are often sewn to the sides and back of the abaya. Younger women in particular strive to set themselves apart by their unique selection. The male shopkeeper will model the latest design of fashion in the veils and abaya and show the young girl the stylish way of throwing the scarf over her head to project a look of smart fashion. The method of tying the abaya to show the exact amount of foot that is allowed without being considered risky is discarded in great detail. Every young girl experiments to find her own method of wearing abaya with flair. A child enters the shop, but a woman emerges veiled and on that day of a marriageable age. Her life changes in that split second. Armin barely glances at the child as she enters the shop, but once she had done her veil and abaya, discreet glances come her way. Men now attempt to catch a glimpse of forbidden, suddenly erotic ankle. With the veil, we Arab women become overwhelmingly tantalizing and desirable to Arab men. But I was now in Cairo, not home in Saudi Arabia, so the full impact of my first blood did little more than irritate me. Sarah and Nora showed me all the things a woman should do. They both warned me against telling Ali as I would, for they knew he would try to make me veil immediately, even in Cairo. Sarah looked at me with great sadness and gave me a long hug. She knew that from that day forward I would be considered a threat and danger to all men until I was safely wed and cloistered behind walls. In Cairo, Ahmed owned a luxurious apartment that spread over 3 floors inside the city center. For privacy, Ahmed and Nora settled on top floor. The 2 Filipino maids, Nora's 3 babies, Sarah and I occupied the second floor. Ali, Hadi and the Egyptian caretaker stayed on the first floor. Sarah and I hugged each other with delight when we realized Ali and Hadi were separated from us by an entire floor. Our first evening, plans were made for Ahmed, Nora, Hadi and Ali to go to a nightclub to watch belly dancing. Ahmed thought that Sarah and I should stay at home with the babies and the Filipino servants. Sarah made no protest, but I pleaded our case so eloquently that Ahmed relented. At 14, I came alive in the land of the pharaohs and joyfully anointed Cairo as my favorite city of all time. That attachment to Cairo has never wavered. The excitement of this city, a passion I had never known before, and which I cannot fully explain to this day. Men and women of every color and dress roamed the streets, searching for adventure and opportunity. I recognized that my life before had been dry, without stimulation, for I saw that Cairo was the opposite of our Arabian cities, which were, to my young eyes, sterile and lifeless. I found the grinding poverty unsettling, yet it was not discouraging, for I saw in it a profound force of life. Poverty can turn a person into a flaming torch for change and revolution, without which mankind would come to a standstill. I thought again of Saudi Arabia and knew that some degree of poverty or need should seep into our lives, force us to renew our spiritual life. Yes, there are many classes of people in my land, from those various levels of the wealthy royal family down to that of lowly salaried workers. But no one, including foreign workers, is without the basic necessities of life. Our government ensures the well-being of all Saudis. Each male citizen is assured of a home, health care, education, a business where he can earn a living, interest-free loans, and even money for food, should the need arise. Our female citizens are provided for by the men of their family, whether it by father, husband, brother, or cousin. As a result of this satisfaction of basic needs, the spark of life generated by material desire is hopelessly lacking in my land. Because of this, I despaired that the pages of history would never turn on my land. We Saudi are too rich, too settled in our apathy for change. As we drove through the bustling city of Cairo, I mentioned this idea to my family, but I saw that only Sarah listened and understood the essence of my thoughts. The sun was now setting, and the sky turned to gold behind the sharp outline of the pyramids. The generous, slow-moving Nile was breathing life throughout the city and into the desert. Watching it, I felt life rush through my veins. Ali and Hadi were furious that Sarah and I, 2 unmarried females, had been allowed to go into the nightclub. Hadi spoke long and seriously to Ali about the deterioration of our family values. He declared with smug satisfaction that his sisters had all been married by the age of 14, and that they were guarded carefully by the men of his family. He said that, as a man of religion, he had to protest to our father when we returned from the trip. Sarah and I, bold in our distance from Riaz, made faces and told him he had not yet become a religious man. We told him in a slang we had learned from watching American movies to save it. Hadi devoured the dancers with his eyes and made crude remarks about their body parts. Yet he swore to Ali that they were nothing but whores, and that if he had his ways, they would be stoned. Hadi was a pompous ass. Even Ali tried off his holier-than-thou attitude and began to thump his fingers on the table with impatience and to look around the room. After Hadi's comments and attitude, I was staggered by his action the following day. Ahmed hired a chauffeur-driven limousine to take Nora, Sarah, and me shopping. Ahmed went to meet a businessman. The caretaker, who doubled as a driver, took the two Filipino and the three to the pool at the Manor House Hotel. When we left the apartment, Ali and Hardy were lounging about, exhausted from the previous late night. The sweltering heat of the city soon tired Sarah, and I offered to go back to the apartment and keep her company until Nora finished her shopping. Nora agreed and sent the driver to drop us off. He would return with Nora afterwards. When we entered the apartment, we heard muffled screams. Sarah and I followed the noise to Hadi and Ali's room. The door was unlocked, and we suddenly realized that what was happening before our eyes. Hadi was raping a young girl, no more than 8 years old, and Ali was holding her. Blood was everywhere. Our brother and Hadi were laughing. At the sight of this traumatic scene, Sarah became hysterical and began to scream and run. Ali's face became a mask of fury as he shoved me from the room, knocking me to the floor. I ran after Sarah. We huddled in our room. When I could no longer endure the sounds of terror that continued to filter up to our floor, I crept back down the stairwell. I was desperately trying to think of course of action when the doorbell rang. I saw Ali answer the door to an Egyptian woman, about 40 years of age. He handed the woman 15 Egyptian pounds and asked her if she had more daughters. She said that she did and that she would return tomorrow. Hadi ushered out the weeping child. The mother, showing no emotion, took the child, who was limping, tears streaming down her face, by the hand and closed the door behind her. Ahmed did not seem surprised when Nora angrily told him the story. He pursed his lips and said he would find out the details. Later he told that Nora that mother herself had sold her child and that there was nothing he could do. Even though caught in his shameful act, Hadi and Ali acted as though nothing had happened. When I sneered at Hadi and asked him how he could be a religious man, he laughed fully in my face. I turned to Ali and told him that I was going to tell father he was attacking young girls, and he laughed even harder than Hadi. He leaned toward me and said, "Tell him, I do not mind." He said that father had given him the name of a man to contact for the same type of service. He smiled and said young girls were most fun, and besides, father always did the same sort of things when he came to Cairo. I felt as though I had been electrocuted. My brain felt burned, my mouth hung open, and I stared blankly at my brother. I had my first thought that all men are wicked. I wanted to destroy my memory of that day, and I lapsed once again into the innocence of the mist of my childhood. I walked softly away. I came to dread what I might discover next in the cruel world of men. I still charged Cairo as a city of enlightenment, but the decay brought by poverty caused me to rethink my earlier notions. Later in the week, I saw the Egyptian mother knocking on the door in the building with another young girl in tow. I wanted to question her to discover how a mother could sell her young. She saw my determined look of inquiry and hurried away. Sarah and I talked with Nora for long hours about the phenomenon, and Nora sighed and said that Ahmed told her it was a way of life in much of the world. When I shouted indignantly that I would rather starve than sell my young, Nora agreed, but said it was easy to say such things when the pangs of hunger were not in your stomach. We left Cairo and it was behind us. Sarah finally had the opportunity to realize her way of Italy. Was her radiant look worth the travel that had freed her to come here? She dreamily proclaimed that the reality soared above her fantasies. We toured the cities of Venice, Florence, and Rome. The gaiety and the laughter of the Italians still ring in my ears. I think their love of life, one of the art's greatest blessings, were overshadowing their contribution to art and architecture. Born in a land of gloom, I am consoled by the idea of a nation that does not take itself too seriously. In Milan, Nora spent more money in a matter of days than most people earn in a lifetime. It was as if she and Ahmed shopped in a frenzy with a deep desire to fill some lonely void in their lives. Hadi and Ali spent their time buying women, for the streets of Italy were filled, by day or by night, with beautiful young women available to those who could pay. I saw Ali as I always had, a selfish young man, concerned only with his pleasure. But Hadi I knew was far more evil, for he bought the women yet condemned them for their role in the act. He desired them yet hated them and the system that left them free to do as they would. His hypocrisy was to me the sense of the evil nature of man. When our plane touched down Riyadh, I prepared myself for more unpleasantness. At 14, I knew that I would now be considered a woman and that a hard fate awaited me. As precarious as my childhood had been, I had a sudden longing to cling to my youth and not let go. I had no doubt that my life as a woman would be a perpetual struggle against the social order of my land, which sacrifices those of my sex. My fear regarding my future soon paled with the agony of the moment. I arrived home to discover that my mother was dying.
Chapter 7. Journey's End. Our one certainty in life is death. As a staunch believer in the words of the Prophet Muhammad, my mother felt no apprehension at the end of her life's journey. She had followed the pure life of a good Muslim and knew her just reward awaited her. Her sorrow was intertwined with her fears for her unmarried daughters. She was our strength, our only support, and she knew that we would be tossed in the wind at her passing. Mother confessed that she had felt her life ebbing even as we departed on our travels. She had no basis for knowledge other than 3 very extraordinary visions that came to her as a dream. Mother's parents had died of fever when she was 8 years of age. As the only female child, mother has nursed her parents during their brief illness. They both seemed to be recovering when, in the middle of a swirling fury of blinding sandstorm, her father had risen on his elbows, smiled at the heavens, uttered 4 words, "I see the garden," and died. Her mother died shortly afterwards, without revealing a hint of what she witnessed awaiting her. My mother, left in the care of her 4 older brothers, was married at an early age to my father. Mother's father had been a compassionate and kind man. He had loved his daughter as he did his sons. When other men of the tribe spoke at the birth of their daughters, grandfather laughed and told them to praise God for the blessing of a tender touch in their home. Mother said she would never have been married at such an early age, had her father lived. He would have given her some years of freedom of childhood for herself, she believed. Sarah and I were sitting by her bedside as a mother haltingly confided her disturbing dreams. The first of her vision came 4 nights before we received words of Sarah's attempted suicide. I was in a Bedouin tent. It was the same as our family tent of my childhood. I was surprised to see my father and mother, young and healthy, sitting beside the coffee fire. I heard my brothers in the distance bringing in the sheep from a day of grazing. I made a rush for my parents, but they could not see me, nor could they hear me as I cried out their names. 2 of my brothers, the one now deceased, came into the tent and sat with my parents. My brothers sipped warm milk from the she-camel in small cups, while my father pounded the beans for the coffee. The dream ended as father quoted a verse he had made up about the paradise awaiting all good Muslims. The verse was simple yet reassuring to my mind. It went, "Pleasant rivers flow, trees shade the yellow of the sun, fruit gathers around the feet, milk and honey knows no end. Loved ones are waiting for those trapped on earth." The dream ended. Mother says she thought little of it, other than that it might be a message of joy from God to assure her that her parents and family were in paradise. About a week after Sarah came home, Mother experienced a second wave. This time, all the members of her deceased family were sitting in a shade of palm tree. They were eating wonderful food from silver dishes. But this time they saw her, and Mother's father got to his feet and came to greet her. He took her by the hand and tried to get her to sit and eat. Mother says she became frightened in the dream and tried to run away, but her father's hand tightened. Mother remembered that she had young to care for and begged her father to release her, told him that she had no time to sit and eat. She said her mother stood and touched her shoulder and told her, "Fazila, God will care for your children. The moment is coming for you to leave them in His care."
Mother awoke from his dream. She said she knew that instant that her time on earth was passing and that she would soon go to those who went before her. 2 weeks after we left on our trip, Mother began to experience back and neck pains. She felt dizzy and sick. The pain was her message. She knew her time was short. She went to the doctor and told him of her dreams and the new pain. He dismissed the dream with a wave of his hand, but became serious at the description of the pain. Special tests soon revealed that Mother had an inoperable tumor on her spine. Mother's most recent dream came the night the doctor confirmed her terminal illness. In the dream, she was sitting with her heavenly family, eating and drinking with great gaiety and abandon. She was in the company of her parents, grandparents, brother and cousins, relatives who had died many years before. Mother smiled as she saw little one crawling along the ground and chasing butterfly in a meadow. Her mother smiled at her and said, Fazila, why don't you not pay attention to your babies? Do you not recognize those of your very blood? Mother suddenly realized that the children were indeed hers. They were the ones lost to her in their infancy. They gathered in her lap, those heavenly 5 babies, and she began to sway and swing and hold them close. Mother was going to the ones lost and losing the ones she had known. She was leaving us. Mercifully, Mother suffered little at her death. I like to think that God saw she had passed the harsh trials of life as a person of godliness and felt no need to wound her further with the pain of passing. Her daughters surrounded every inch of the deathbed. She lay cloaked with the love of her own flesh and blood. Her eyes lingered on each of us. No words were spoken, but we felt her farewell. When her gaze rested upon my face, I saw her worries gather as a storm, for she knew that I, unbending to the wind, would find life harder than most. Mother's body was washed and prepared for her return to earth by the older aunties of her family. I saw her as they wrapped the white linen shroud around her thin body, worn down by childbearing and disease. Her face was peaceful, now free of earthly worries. I thought Mother appeared younger in death than in life. It was difficult for me to believe that she had given birth to 16 children, of whom 11 had survived. Our immediate family, along with all of the father's wives and the children, gathered in our home. A verse from the Quran was read to offer comfort. Mother's shroud-wrapped body was then placed in the back seat of the black limousine and driven away by Umar. Our custom forbids female at the burial side, but my sister and I showed an unyielding front to our father. He relented on the promise that we would not veil or pull out our hair. And so it was that our entire family followed the car of death, a sad but silent caravan, into the desert. In Islam, to show grief at a loved one's passing indicates displeasure with the will of God. Besides, our family comes from the Najd region of Saudi Arabia, and our people do not publicly mourn the passing of loved ones. A freshly dug grave in the endless desert of our land had already been prepared by the Sudanese servant. The body of her mother was tenderly lowered, and the white cloth covering her face was removed by Ali, her only earthly son. My sister huddled from Mother's final resting place, but my eyes could not leave the graveside. I was the last child born of her body. I would stay with her earthly cloak until the final moment. I flinched as I watched the slaves push the red sands of the empty quarter over her face and body. As I watched the sands cover the body of one I so adored, I suddenly remembered a beautiful verse by the great Lebanese philosopher Khalil Gibran. Mayhap a funeral among men is a wedding feast among the angels. I imagined my mother at the side of her mother and father with her own little ones gathered in her arms. Certain at that moment that I would, another day, feel the loving touch of mother, I ceased weeping and walked toward my sister, shocking them with my smile of joy and serenity. I caught at the powerful verse God had sent to erase my pain, and my sister nodded in perfect understanding at the wise Khalil Gibran's words. We were leaving mother behind in the empty vastness of the desert, yet I knew it no longer mattered that there was no stone placed to mark her presence there, or that no religious service were held to speak of the simple woman who had been a flame of love during her time on earth. Her reward was that she was now with her other loved ones, waiting there for us. Ali seemed at a loss for once, and I knew his pain was keen also. Father had little to say and avoided our villa from the day of mother's death. He sent us messages through his second wife, who had now replaced mother as the head of his wife. Within the month, we learned through Ali that father was preparing to wed again. For four wives, the common with the very wealthy and very poor Bedouin in Milan. The Quran says that each wife must be treated as the other. The affluent of Saudi Arabia have no difficulty in providing equality for their wives. The poorest Bedouin have only to erect 4 tents and provide simple fare. For these reasons, you find many of the richest and the poorest Muslim with 4 wives. It is only the middle class Saudi who has to find contentment with one woman, but it is impossible for him to find the funds to provide middle class standards for 4 separate families. Father was planning to marry one of the royal cousin, Randa, a girl with whom I had played childhood games in what seemed like another lifetime. Father's new bride was 15, only 1 year older than I, his youngest child of my mother. 4 months after the burial of my mother, I attended the wedding of my father. I was surly and refused to join in the festivities. I was awash with the pent-up emotion of animosity. After the birth of 16 children, many years of obedient servitude, I knew that the memory of my mother had been effortlessly disregarded by my father. Not only was I furious at my father, I also felt overwhelming hatred towards my former playmate Randa, who was now going to be the 4th wife, filling the void created by my mother's death. The wedding was grand, the bride was young and beautiful. My anger toward Randa collapsed as my father led her from the huge ballroom to the married bed. My eyes widened as they saw her worried face. Her lips trembled with fear as a roaring flame is instantaneously extinguished. The sight of Randa's obvious despair quietened and transformed my passion from black hate to tender commiseration. I felt ashamed of my hostility, for I saw that she was the rest of us, helpless in the face of towering, dominating Saudi manhood. Father traveled with his virginal bride on an extended honeymoon to Paris and Monte Carlo. In my propitious change of emotion, I waited for Randa's return. And as I lingered, I vowed to awaken Father's new wife to a path of purpose, freedom for women in our land. Not only would I provide Randa with new challenges and dream of power, I also knew I would find Father in the political and spiritual awakening of his young wife. I could not forgive him for so easily forgetting the wonderful woman who was my mother. Chapter 8 Girlfriends. Upon their return from their honeymoon, Father and Randa moved into our villa. Even though Mother was no longer with the living, her younger children continued to reside in Father's villa, and his new wife was expected to assume the duties of a mother. Since I was the youngest child, only 1 year behind Randa, the custom seemed ludicrous in our situation. However, there is no room for maneuvering or change to fit the individual condition in Saudi Arabia. So Randa was installed in our home, a child masquerading as a woman and mistress of a large household. Randa returned from her honeymoon quiet, almost broken. She rarely talked, never smiled, and moved slowly through the villa, as though she might cause some injury or harm. Father seemed pleased with his new position, for he spent many hours clustered in his living quarters with his youthful bride. After the 3rd week of Father's undivided attention to Randa, Ali cracked a joke about Father's sexual intentions. I asked my brother what he thought of Randa's feeling in the matter, to be wed to one so much older, one she did not know or love. Ali's vacant expression told me all too clearly not only that thought had never entered his head, but also that such a consideration would not find fertile ground in his narrow realm of understanding. He well reminded me that nothing would ever penetrate that dark sea of egoistical matter that constitutes the mind of Saudi men. Randa and I held different philosophies. She believed, what is written on your forehead, your eyes will see. I think the picture in your mind will be photographed by your life. In addition, Randa was painfully shy and timid, whereas I greet life with a certain fierceness. I noticed Randa's eye as they followed the hands of the clock. She began to fidget a few hours prior to Father's usual arrival time for lunch and for evening meal. She had orders from my father to eat her meals before his arrival and then to shower and prepare herself for him. At noon each day, Randa would order the cook to serve her lunch. She would eat sparingly and then retire to her quarters. My father generally arrived at the villa around 1 o'clock and his lunch and then went to his new wife. He could leave the villa around 5 o'clock and return to his offices. In Saudi Arabia, the workday is divided into two shifts, from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. and after a 4 hours afternoon break from 5 p.m. until 8 p.m. Observing Randa's pinched look, I thought of asking father about the teaching of Quran, the instruction from God that each Muslim was supposed to divide his days and evenings among 4 wives. Since the day he had wed Randa, his 3 older wives had been virtually ignored. After consideration, I thought better of my boldness, and so the evenings were a repeat of the lunch break. Randa would call for her dinner around 8 o'clock, eat and go to her room for her bath and preparation for her husband. I generally would not see her again until after my father left for the work the next morning. She had orders to wait in the bedroom until he had left. The anxiety of watching Randa's bleak life unfold spurred me on to mischief. I had 2 girlfriends who frightened even me with their boldness. Their liveliness might encourage Randa to become more assertive. Little did I know what forces I would unleash by forming a girls' club with Randa, my 2 indomitable friends, and myself as the sole member. We called our club Lively Lips, for we had as our goal to talk ourselves into bravery to battle the silent acceptance of the role of women in our society. We solemnly vowed to uphold the following goals. At every opportunity, let the spirit of women's rights run our lips and guide our tongue. Number 2, each member should strive to bring in 1 new member per month. Number 3, our first goal would be to stop marriages of young women to old men. We young women of Arabia recognize that the men of our land would never pursue social change for our sex, that we would have to force change. As long as Saudi women accepted their authority, men would rule. We surmise that it was the responsibility of each individual woman to foment desire for control of her life and other female lives within her small circle. Our women are so beaten down by centuries of mistreatment that are with an awakening of the spirit. My 2 friends, Nadia and Wafa, were not of the royal family, but were children of prominent family in the cities of Riyadh. Nadia's father owned a huge contracting company because of his willingness to give large kickback to various princes. His company was awarded large government building contracts. He employed thousands of foreign workers from Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Yemen. Nadia's father was almost as wealthy as the royals. He easily spotted 3 wives and 14 children. Nadia was 17, the middle of 7 daughters. She had watched with dismay as her 3 older sisters were married off for the purpose of family connections and convenience. Surprisingly, all 3 marriages had suited her sister and they were happy with good husbands. Nadia said that kind of luck would never continue. She felt with increasing pessimism that she would end up with an old, ugly, and cruel husband. Nadia was indeed more fortunate than most Saudi women. Her father had determined that she could continue her education. He had told her she did not have to marry until she was 21. This imposed deadline spurred Nadia into action. She declared that since she had only 4 more years of freedom left, she was going to taste every aspect of life during that time to provide dreams for the remainder of a full adult life married to an old man. Wafa's father was a leading Mutwa, and his extremism had driven his daughter to extremes of Her father had only one wife, Wafa's mother, but he was a cruel and vicious man. Wafa swore she wanted nothing to do with a religion that appointed such man as her father as a leader. Wafa believed in God and thought Muhammad had been his message. He thought that somehow Muhammad's message had been conveyed incorrectly by his follower, for no God would wish such grief on women, half of the world's people. Wafa needed to look no further than her own home. Her mother was never allowed out of the house. She was a virtual prisoner enslaved by a man of God. There were 6 children, 5 of whom were adult sons. Wafa had been a late surprise to her parents, and her father was so disappointed that he had a girl child. He had virtually ignored her except to give her orders. She was ordered to stay in the home and learn to sew and cook. From the age of 7, Wafa was forced to wear an abaya and to cover her head. Each morning from the time she was 9, her father would ask her if she had seen her first blood. He was alarmed that his daughter would venture out, face uncovered, after she was classified by God as a woman. Wafa was allowed few friends. What her friends she had soon drifted away since Wafa's father made a habit of boldly inquiring in her friends' presence about their first blood. Wafa's mother, weary and exhausted from the rigid rules of her husband, had made a decision late in life silently to defy his demands. She assisted her daughter in sneaking out of and told her husband the child was sleeping or studying the Quran when inquiries concerning Wafa's whereabouts were voiced. I imagine myself bold and rebellious, but Wafa and Nadia made my stance for women seem puny and powerless. They said that I did was to provide intelligent stimulation, that my answer to a problem was to talk it to death, but that in reality my efforts to help women were useless. After all, my life had not changed. I realized they were right. I will never forget one incident that occurred in an underground car park close to the soap area, not far from the spot that foreigners call Chop Chop Square. Since that is where our criminals lose their heads or their hands on Friday, our day of religion. I had hidden the pressing of my first blood from my father since I was in no rush to swathe myself in black garb of our women. Unfortunately, Nora and Ahmed decided that I had postponed the inevitable long enough. Nora told me that if I did not tell my father immediately, she would. So I gathered my friends around me, including Brenda, and we made a mission to purchase my new life's uniform, black scarf on black veil on black abaya. Omar drove us to the entrance of the soap area, and we four young women disembarked, agreeing to meet him in 2 hours at the same point. Omar always accompanied us into the soap to keep special watch on the women of the family, but that day he had an important errand to run and took the opportunity while we were shopping. Besides, father's new wife was accompanying his daughter, and Omar was reassured by Brenda's acquiescent presence. He had seen no indication that Brenda was slowly awakening after the long dull sleep of submission. We milled about the shops, hands examining the various scarves, veils, and abayas. I wanted something special, a way of being an original in the ocean of black-garbed women. I cursed myself for not having an abaya made in Italy, from the finest Italian silk, with an artist's intricate design so that when I breezed past, people would know there was an individual under the black covering, a woman with style and class. Everyone was veiled except me, and as we made our way to the heart of the soap to continue our search, I noticed that Wafa and Nadia, heads together, were whispering and giggling. Ren and I stepped up our pace, and I asked them what was so amusing. Nadia looked towards me and spoke through her veil. He said they were remembering a man they had met on their last trip to the soap. A man? I looked back at Brenda. We were both confused at their meaning. It took us only an hour to find out a suitable abaya, veil, and scarf. The selection seemed rather limited. Life changed quickly. I had entered the soap area as an individual bursting with life, my face expressing my emotion to the world. I left the shopping area covered from head to toe, a faceless creature in the black. I must admit that the first few moments of whaling were exciting. I found the whale a novelty and looked back with interest as Saudi teenage boys stared at me. Now a mysterious figure in black. I knew they were wishing for a bit of breeze to blow the whale away from my face so that they might catch a glimpse of my forbidden skin. For a moment, I felt myself a thing of beauty, a work so lovely that I must be covered to protect man's uncontrollable desires. The novelty of wearing a veil and abaya was fleeting though. When we walked out of the cool soap area into the blazing hot sun, I gasped for the breath and sucked furiously through the sheer black fabric. The air tasted stale and dry as it filtered through the thin gauzy cloth. I had purchased the sheerest veil available, yet I felt as I was seeing light through the thick screen. How could a woman see through veils made of thickest fiber? The sky was no longer blue, the glow of the sun had dimmed. My heart clung to my stomach when I realized that from that moment outside my own home, I would not experience life as it all its color. The world suddenly seemed a dull place and dangerous too. I dropped and stumbled along the pitted cracked pavement, fearful of breaking an ankle or leg. My friends burst out laughing at the awkwardness of my move and my futile efforts to adjust my weight. I stumbled over several children of a Bedouin woman and looked in envy at the freedom of her veil. Bedouin women wear veils that fit across their noses, leaving their eyes free to examine their surroundings. Oh, how I wish to be a Bedouin. I would cover my face gladly if I could only leave my eyes free to see an entire night change of my life around me. We arrived early at the meeting place designated by Umar. Randa glanced at her watch. We had nearly an hour before he was due. She suggested that we go back into the soak area since it was too hot in the boiling sun. Nadia and Wafa asked us if we wanted to have some fun. I said sure, without hesitation. Randa balanced from foot to foot, looking for Umar. I could tell she was uncomfortable with the very word fun. I, with my marvelous power of persuasion, convinced Randa to go along with Nadia and Wafa. I was curious, never having broken any of the rules laid down for females. Poor Randa was simply accommodating to a stranger girl. The two girls exchanged smiles and told us to follow them. They made their way to a car park beneath a new office building not far from the soak area. Men who worked in the building and nearby shops parked there. We four young women inched our ways across the busy section. Randa squealed and slapped my hand when I raised my veil so that I could see the traffic. Too late, I realized that I had exposed my face to every man on the street. The men appeared stunned by their luck, for they had seen a woman's face in a public place. I instantly realized that it was far better for me to be run down by a speeding car than to commit such an act of revolution. When we reached the car park lifts, I staggered with shock at my friend's action. Wafa and Nadia approached a foreign man, a strikingly handsome Syrian. They asked him if he wanted to have some fun. For a moment, he seemed ready to bolt and run. He looked to his left and right and punched the lift button. Finally, he thought better of departing, considering the rare opportunity to meet available and possibly beautiful women in Saudi Arabia. He asked what kind of fun. Wafa asked the Syrian if he had a car and a private apartment. He said yes, he had an apartment and a roommate, a Lebanese. Nadia asked if his friend was looking for a girlfriend, and the Syrian grinned and said yes, indeed, both of them were. Ren and I had recovered enough to move our feet. We gathered up our abayas and ran out of the car park in fear of our lives. In the process, I lost my scarf. When I turned to pick it up, Randa ran straight into me. She rolled backwards and lay sprawled in the sand, her forbidden legs exposed. When Wafa and Nadia found us, we were breathing hard and leaning against a shop window. They were hanging onto each other, laughing. They had watched us earlier as I struggled to help Randa to her feet. We whispered our angry words. How could they do such a stupid thing? Pick up a foreign man? What kind of fun were they planning anyway? Didn't they know that Randa would be stoned and the three of us imprisoned? Or worse, fun was fun, but what they were doing was suicide. Wafa and Nadia simply laughed and shrugged their shoulders at our outbursts. They knew that if they were caught, they would be punished, but they didn't care. To them, their impending future was bleak. It was worth a risk. Besides, they might meet a nice foreign man and marry him. Any man was better than a Saudi man. I thought Randa was going to swoon. She ran into the street, looking up and down for Omar. She knew there would be no... If she were caught in such a situation, she was terrified. Omar, very and perspective, asked us what had happened. Randa fidgeted and started to speak, but I interrupted and told Omar a story about seeing a youth steal a necklace from the gold store. He had been beaten by the shopkeeper and roughly hauled off to Gul by a policeman. My voice had a tremor as I told Omar we were upset because he was so young and we knew he would lose his hand for his act. I was relieved that Omar believed my story. Randa inked her hand under my black cloak and gave me a squeeze of gratitude. Later I found out from Nadia and Wafa what they called fun. They met foreign men, usually from neighboring Arab countries, occasionally a Brit or an American, in car park lifts. They selected handsome men they felt they could love. Sometimes the men became frightened and jumped into the lift, zooming to another floor. At other times they would be interested. If the man they approached was intrigued, Wafa and Nadia would agree to a meeting time at the same lift. They would ask him to try to find a van instead of car to pick them up. Later, at the agreed time, the girls would pretend to go shopping. The driver would drop them at the store. They would purchase a few items and go to the meeting place. Sometimes the man would become weary and not show up. At other times, they would be nervously waiting. If the man had obtained the van, The girls would make sure no one was around and then jump quickly into the back. The men would cautiously drive to their apartment, and the same degree of caution would be used with the girls inside. If they were caught, the sentence would be severe, quite possibly death for everyone involved. The explanation for the ban was clear. In Saudi Arabia, men and women are not allowed in the same car unless they are close relatives. If the mutwas become suspicious, they will stop the vehicle and check identification. Also, single men are not allowed to entertain women in their apartments or home. At the slightest suspicion of impropriety, it is not uncommon for mutwas to surround the home of a foreigner and take everyone there, both male and female, to the door. I was fearful for my friends. I warned them again and again of the consequences. They were young and reckless and bored with their lives. They laughingly told me of other activities they did for diversion. They dialed random phone numbers until a foreign man answered. Any man would do, so long as he was not South Korean. They would ask me if he was alone and longing for female companionship. Generally, the reply was yes, since there are so few women allowed in Saudi Arabia and most foreign men work there on single status visas. Once a man's eligibility was established, the girls would ask him to describe his body. Flattered, usually the man would graphically describe his body and then ask them to do the same. Then Wafa and Nadia would portray themselves from head to toe, in lurid detail. It was great amusement, they said, and they sometimes met the man later, in the same fashion as the car park lovers. I wonder how intimate my friend became. These pickup lovers, I was astonished to hear that they did everything except penetration. They could not risk losing their virginity, for they realized the consequences they would face on their wedding night. Their husband would return them to their homes and their father would away as well. The mutwas would investigate. They might lose their lives. If not, they would still have nowhere to live. Wafa said that in their encounter with these men, she and Nadia never moved their veils. They would take off all their clothes but keep their veils intact. The man would tease and beg and even try to force them to move their veils. The girls said they felt safe so long as no man saw their faces. They said if any of the men had become serious, they might have considered exposing their faces. But of course, none of them did. They too were only having fun. My friends were desperately trying to find an out from their future, which loomed before them like a dark and endless night. Randa and I wept when we discovered our friend's behavior. I felt a hatred for the custom of my land creep into my throat like a foul taste. The absolute lack of control or freedom for our sex drove young girls like Wafa and Nadia to desperate acts. These were days that was sure to cost them their lives if they were discovered. Before the year was out, Nadia and Wafa were arrested. Unfortunately for them, members of a self-proclaimed public morality committee who roamed the streets of Riyadh in an effort to apprehend people in acts prohibited by the Quran had learned of their forbidden activities. Just as Nadia and Wafa entered the back of a van, a carload of young Saudi zealots wheeled in and blocked the vehicle. They had been watching the area for weeks after one of the committee members, while at work, overheard a Palestinian tale of two veiled women who propositioned. The lives of Wafa and Nadia were spared by the fact their hymens were intact. Neither the Morals Committee nor the Religious Council, and especially not their fathers, believed their unlikely fabrication, that they had simply asked the men for a ride when their driver was late. I suppose it was the best story they could concoct, considering the circumstances. The Religious Council questioned every man who worked in the area and found a total of 14 who said they had been approached by two veiled women. None of the men confessed that they had participated in any activities with them. After 3 months of oblique imprisonment, owing to the lack of hard evidence of sexual activity, the committee released Wafa and Nadia to their respective fathers for punishment. Surprisingly, Wafa's father, the unbending man of religion, sat with his daughter and questioned her as to the reason for her misdeeds. When she cried and told him her feelings of rejection and hopelessness, he expressed sorrow at her unhappiness. In spite of his regret and sympathy, he informed Wafa that it was his decision that she should be removed from all further temptation. She was advised to study the Quran and to accept a simple life preordained for women, far removed from the city. He arranged a hasty marriage with a Bedouin mutwa from a small village. The man was 53 and Wafa 17, would be his third wife. Ironically, it was Nadia's father who was gripped with a fearsome rage. He refused to speak with his daughter and ordered her confined to her room until a decision was made to her punishment. A few days later, my father came home early from the office and called Brenda and me. We sat disbelieving when he told us that Nadia was going to be drowned in her family's swimming pool by her father on the following morning, Friday at 10 o'clock. Father said that Nadia's entire family would witness her execution. My heart fluttered with fear when father asked Randa if she or had ever accompanied Wafa or Nadia on their shameful undertaking. I moved forward and started to voice my denials when father shouted and shoved me back into the sofa. Randa burst into tears and told him the story of the day so long ago when we had purchased my first buy and whale. Father sat unmoving, eyes unblinking until Randa had finished. He then asked about our women's club, the one with the name of 5 Lilies. He said that we might as well tell the truth that Nadia had convinced all our activities days ago. When Randa's tongue froze, father removed our club paper from his briefcase. He had searched my room and found our records and membership list. For once in my life, my mouth was dry and my lips locked as with a chain. Father calmly put the papers back into a pile on the briefcase. He looked clearly into Randa's eyes and said, "On this day I have divorced you. Your father will send a driver within an hour to take you to your family. You are forbidden to contact my children." To my horror, father turned slowly to me. "You are my child. Your mother was a good woman. Even so, had you participated in these activities with Wafa and Nadia, I would uphold the teaching of the Quran and see you lowered into your grave. You will avoid my attention and concentrate on your schooling while I will work towards a suitable marriage." He paused for a moment, coming close and looked hard into my eyes. "Sultana, accept your future as one who obeys, for you have no alternative." Father stooped for the papers in his case and, without looking at Randa or me, left the room. Humiliated, I followed Randa to her room and numbly watched as she gathered her jewels, her pearls, and her books into an unruly pile on the large bed. Her face was wiped clean of emotion. I could not form the words that were loose in my head. The doorbell rang too quickly, and I found myself helping the servants carry her things to the car. Without a word of farewell, Randa left my home, but not my heart. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I sat alone, staring yet unseeing out of my bedroom balcony. I thought of Nadia and imagined her bound in heavy chains, dark hood gathered around her head, hands lifting her from the ground and lowering her into the blue-green waters of her family's swimming pool. I closed my eyes and felt her body thrashing, her mouth gasping for air, lungs screaming for relief from the rushing water. I remember her flashing brown eyes and her special way of lifting her chin while filling the room with laughter. I recalled the soft feel of her fair skin and considered with a grimace the quick work of the cool earth on such softener. I looked at my watch and saw that it was 10:10, and I felt my chest tighten with the knowledge that Nadia would laugh no more. It was the most dramatic hour in my young history, yet I knew that my friend's scheme for fun, as bad or sad as they were, should not have caused Nadia's death or Wafa's. Such cruel actions were worst of all commentaries on the wisdom of the man who consume and destroy the lives and dreams of their women with emotionless indifference. Chapter 9: Foreign Women. After the sudden departure of Randa, the marriage of Wafa and the death of Nadia, I sank to the lowest possible level of existence. I can recall thinking that my body no longer required the fresh breath of life. I fancied myself in hibernation and wanted to feel the shallow breathing and lowered heartbeat experienced by creatures of the wild that will themselves away for months at a time. I would lie in my bed, hold my nose with my finger, and pinch my mouth closed with my teeth. Only when my lungs forced the expulsion of air would I regretfully recognize little control over my vital functions. The house servants felt my pain keenly, for I was known as a sensitive member of our family and had always shown concern for their situation. The meager amounts of cash doled out each month by Omar seemed a high price to pay for being so far removed from those they loved. In an effort to rouse my interest in life, my Filipino maid Marcy began to revive my thoughts by telling me stories of her country. Our long talk served to thaw the impersonal relationship that exists between mistress and servant. One day she timidly revealed her life's ambition. She wanted to save enough money working as a housemaid for our family to return to the Philippines to study nursing. Filipino nurses are in great demand worldwide, and it is considered a lucrative career for women in the Philippines. Marcy said that after she graduated, she would return to Saudi Arabia to work in one of our modern hospitals. She smiled as she reported that Filipino nurses made a salary of 3,800 Saudi Riyal each month, approximately $1,000 a month compared to the $200 a month she earned as a maid. With such large salary, she said she could support her entire family in the Philippines. When Mercy was only 3, her father was killed in a mining accident. Her mother was 7 months pregnant with a second child. The life was bleak, but Mercy's grandmother tended to the 2 children while her mother worked 2 shifts as a maid in a local hotel. Mercy's mother repeated many times that knowledge was the only solution to poverty, and she frugally saved for her children's education. 2 years before Mercy was to enroll in a nursing school, her younger brother Tony was run over by a car and suffered extensive injuries. His legs were so crushed that they had to be amputated. His medical treatment ate away at Mercy's school fund until the small tin can was bare. Upon hearing Mercy's life story, I wept with bitter tears. I asked her how she could maintain her happy smile day after day, week after week. Mercy smiled broadly. It was easy for her, she said, since she had a dream and a way to realize her dream. Her experience growing up in a racially poor area in the Philippines left Mercy feeling extremely fortunate to have a job and to fill her plate 3 times a day. People from her area did not actually die of hunger, she emphasized, but of malnutrition that left them vulnerable to diseases that would not have flourished in a healthy community. Mercy shared the stories of her people so vividly that I felt myself a part of her history, her land, her rich culture. I knew I had underestimated Mercy and other Philippines, for until then I had given them little thought other than to consider them simple folk lacking in ambition. How wrong I was. Several weeks later, Mercy felt confident enough to talk about her friend Madeline. By telling me about Madeline, she opened up the question of the moral values of my land. Through Mercy, I first learned that women from third world countries were held as a sex slave in my own country, Saudi Arabia. Mercy and Madeline had been childhood friends. As poor as Mercy's family was, Madeline's was poorer. Madeline and her 7 siblings used to beg on the highway that connected their province to Manila. Occasionally, a big car transporting foreigners would stop and hug white hands would drop a few coins into their outstretched palm. While Mercy attended school, Madeline foraged for food. At an early age, Madeline had a dream and a plan to bring that dream to reality. When she was 18, she sewed a dress for Mercy's court and traveled to Manila. There she located an agency that employed Filipinos to work abroad. Madeline applied for a maid's position. She was so petite and pretty that the Lebanese owner slyly hinted that he could get her a job in Manila rather. There she could earn a substantial amount beyond the imagination of a maid. Madeline, although raised in a poor circumstances, was a devout Catholic. Her negative reaction convinced the Lebanese that she would not sell her body. Signed with regret, the man told her to fill in the application form and wait. The Lebanese told her that he had just received a contract to supply more than 3,000 Filipino workers to the Persian Gulf area, and that Madeline would be given priority in the maid position since the rich Arabs always requested pretty maids. He winked and patted her on the buttocks as she left his office. Madeline was both excited and frightened when she received confirmation of a maid's position in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. About the same time, Mercy's plans of attending nursing school fell through and she decided to follow Madeline's footsteps and search for a job outside the Philippines. When Madeline left for Saudi Arabia, Mercy joked that she would not be far behind. The good friends hugged their farewells and promised to write. 4 months later, when Mercy learned that she too was to work in Saudi Arabia, she still had not heard from Madeline. Once there, she did not know where to find her friend other than in the city of Riyadh. Since Mercy was going to work for a family in the same city, she was determined to locate her friend. I recall the night Mercy arrived in our home. Mother was responsible for the running of the household and the placement of the servants. I remember that Mercy seemed a frightened little thing, immediately clinging to the eldest of our Filipino maids. Since we had more than 20 servants in the villa, Mercy was given a little notice. As an inexperienced servant, only 19-year-old, she was assigned to clean the rooms of the 2 youngest daughters of the house, Sarah and me. I had given her scant attention during the 16 months she had patiently and quietly followed me through the villa, asking if I required anything. Mercy surprised me by confessing that other Filipino servants thought her blessed in her job since neither Sarah nor I ever struck her or raised our voices in disapproval. My eyes flashed and I asked Marcy if people were struck in our home. I breathed a sigh of relief when she told me no, not in our villa. She did say that Ali was known to be difficult, always speaking in a loud and insulting tone. But his only violent action had been to kick Omer in the shin several times. I laughed, feeling little sympathy for Omer. Mercy whimpered as she told me the gossip of the servants. She said the father's second wife, a woman from one of the neighboring Gulf states, pinched and beat her female servants daily. One poor girl from Pakistan had a brain injury from being knocked down the stairs. Told that she did not work fast enough, she rushed down to the washroom with a basket of dirty sheet and towel. When she accidentally bumped into the woman became so enraged that she punched the maid in the stomach, sending her tumbling down the stairs. As the girl lay moaning, the older woman ran down the stairs to kick and scream at the girl to finish her chore. When the girl did not move, she was accused of pretense. Eventually, the girl had to be taken to a doctor. She was still not normal, constantly holding her head in her hands and giggling. Under orders from father's wife, the palace doctor filled in a form stating that the girl had fallen and suffered confusion. As soon as she could travel, she was to send back to Pakistan. She was denied her past 2 months' salary and sent to her parents with only 15 Saudi riyal. Why did I act so surprised? Marcy wanted to know. Most of the maids were mistreated in my country. Our villa was a rare exception. I reminded her that I had been in many of my friends' homes, and while I had to admit that little consideration was given to servants, I had never witnessed an actual beating. I had seen some of my friends verbally abuse their mates, but I had paid in little heed since no one had ever been physically assaulted. Marcy sighed wearily and said that physical and sexual abuse were generally hidden. She reminded me that I lived only yards from a palace that hid the sufferings of many young girls, and yet I had no knowledge of them. She softly told me to keep my eyes open to observe how women from other lands were treated in my country. I nodded sadly in agreement. Through this conversation, Marcy became more aware of my empathic nature. She decided to take me into her confidence and tell me the full story of her friend Madeline. I remember our conversation as well as if it were yesterday. Our exchanges are clear in my mind. I can see her earnest face before me now. Ma'am, I want you to know about my closest friend, Madeline. You are a princess. Perhaps the day will come that you can help us poor Filipino women. I was alone on that morning and felt bored of creeping into my day. So I nodded, eager for my morning of revealing gossip, even from a Filipino. I settled myself on my bed. Marcy dutiful stuffed pillow behind my head, just the way she knew I liked them. I told her, before you begin your tale, go and get me a bowl of fresh fruit and a glass of laban. Laban is a buttermilk drink common in the Middle East. After she had returned with a tray of food and my cold beverage, I stuck my feet out from under the covers and told Marcy to rub them while she told me about it. This Madeline friend of hers. Looking back, I burned with shame as I recalled my selfish, childish manner. I was intrigued by the thought of a tragic story, yet not content to sit still and listen until my desire were met. Older and wiser now, I can only look back with regret at the habits I pick up from my Saudi culture. No Saudi I know has ever shown the slightest interest in a servant's life. The number of family members, their dreams and aspirations. People from a third world were there to serve us wealthy Saudis, nothing more. Even my mother, who was and loving, rarely expressed an interest in servants' personal problem, though I do attribute that to mother's overwhelming responsibility of running a huge household and also satisfying my demanding father. I had no such excuse. I cringed as I now acknowledged that Marcy and the other servants were little more than robots to me, there to do my bidding, and to think that Marcy and the household servants thought me kind, for I alone questioned them about their lives. It is a hard remembrance for one who considers herself sensitive. Pensive, her face without expression, Marcy began to rub my feet and started her story. Ma'am, before I left my country, I begged that Lebanese man for the address of Madeline's employer. He said no, he was not allowed. I told the lie, ma'am. I said that I had items to take to my friend from her mother. After I begged, he finally agreed and gave me a phone in the area of Riyadh that Madeline worked. Is her employer a prince? No, ma'am. He lives in a district called Al Malaz, about 30 minutes by car from here. Our palace was in the Al Nasir area, a prestigious location inhabited by many royals. the most wealthy residential district of Riyadh. I had been in the area of Malaz once, a long time ago, and recalled many nice palaces of the upper business society of Saudi. I knew Marcy was forbidden to leave the palace ground rather than on special monthly shopping trips organized by Umar for the female servants. Since our service, like most domestic in Saudi Arabia, worked a brutal 7-day week, 52 weeks a year, I wonder how she could slip away to visit her friend. I voiced my interest. How did you manage a trip to Al Malaz? Marcy hesitated for a short moment. Well, ma'am, you know the Filipino driver Anthony? We had 4 drivers, 2 Filipinos and 2 Egyptians. I was generally driven by Umar or the other Egyptian. The Filipinos were used for grocery shopping and the running of errands. Anthony, the young one who is always smiling? Yes, ma'am, that one. He and I like to see each other and he agreed to take me to find my friend. Marcy, you have a sweetheart. I burst out of laughing. And Umar, how did you avoid getting into trouble with Umar? We waited until Umar went with the family to Taif and we took our opportunity. Marcy smiled at my look of pleasure. She knew nothing gave me more joy than a successful trip pulled over by the men of the household. First, I called the telephone number given to me in the Philippines. No one would give me permission to speak with Madeline. I said I had a message from Madeline's mother. After a lot of hard work of convincing, I was told the location and description of the villa. Anthony drove to the area and located the place to deliver a letter to Madeline. I yemeni took the letter from Anthony. 2 weeks later, I received a call from my friend. I could barely hear Madeline, for she whispered, afraid she would be discovered using the telephone. She told me she was in a very bad situation. Please, to come and help her. Over the telephone, we made a plan. I put aside my food and gave Marcy my full attention. I told her to stop rubbing my feet. I felt the danger of their meeting and my interest in this brave Filipino whom I did not know grew. 2 months passed. We knew the hot summer months would give us an opportunity to meet. We were afraid Madeline would be taken to Europe with her employer, but she was told to remain in Riyadh. When you and the family along with Umar left the city, I hid in the back seat of the black Mercedes and Anthony took me to the Madeline. Marcy, her voice crackling with her first show of emotion, described Madeline's dilemma. I sat in the car while Anthony rang the bell of the villa. While I was waiting, I could not help but notice the condition of the villa wall. The paint was peeling and the gate was rusty. The few bits of greenery hanging over the villa wall were dying from the lack of water. I could tell it was a bad place. I knew my friend was in a dangerous situation if she worked in such a home. I felt depressed even before I was allowed inside. Anthony had to ring the bell 4 or 5 times before we heard activity as someone came to answer our call. Everything happened just as Madeline had said. It was creepy. An old Yemeni man dressed in a tartan wrapped around skirt opened the gate. He looked as though he had been sleeping. His ugly face told us he was none too happy at being awakened from a nap. Anthony and I both became frightened, and I heard the shaking of Anthony's voice when he asked, please, to speak to Miss Madeline from the Philippines. The Yemeni could hardly speak English, but Anthony has a little knowledge of Arabic. Together they managed to understand each other enough for the Yemeni to refuse us entry. He waved us away with his hand and began to close the door when I leaped from the back seat and began to cry. Through my tears, I told him that Madeline was my sister. I had just arrived in Riyadh and was working at the palace of one of the royal princes. I thought that might frighten him, but his expression remained the same. I waved an envelope at him that had just arrived from Philippines. Our mother was gravely ill. I had to speak with Madeline for a few moments to deliver a last message from our dying mother. I pray to God not to punish me for such lies. I think God heard me, for the Yemeni seemed to change his mind when he heard the Arab word for mother. I saw that he was thinking. He looked first at Anthony and then at me, and finally told us to wait a moment. He closed the gate, and we heard the flip-flop of his sandals as he made his way back towards the villa. We knew the Yemeni was going inside to question Madeline and ask her to describe her sister. I looked at Anthony with a weak smile. It seemed our plan might work. Mercy paused, remembering that day. Ma'am, that was a frightening Yemeni. He had a mean look and carried a curved knife at his waist. Anthony and I almost caught in the car and drove back to the palace. But the thought of my poor friend gave me a feeling of power. Madeline had told me that 2 Yemenis guarded the villa. They watched the females of the house. None of the female servants was ever allowed to leave her place of work. Madeline had told me over the telephone that the young Yemeni was without a good heart and would not allow anyone in the gate, even her dying mother herself. Madeline thought we might succeed with the old Yemeni. Since the entire family was on holiday in Europe, the young Yemeni had been given a 2-week leave and had returned to Yemen to marry. At this time, the only men in the villa grounds were the old yummy and a gardener from Pakistan. I looked at my watch and Anthony looked at his watch. Finally, we heard the shuffling of feet as the old man returned. The gate creaked with a slow swing. I shivered, for I had a feeling I was entering the gates of hell. The old Yemeni grunted and made a motion with his hand that Anthony was to stay outside with the car. Only I would be allowed inside. I tensed up as I imagined the fear Marcy must have felt. How did you dare? I would have called the police. Marcy shook her head. The police do not help Filipino in this country. We would be reported to our employer and then gold or deported according to the wishes of your father. The police in this country are for the strong, not for the weak. I knew what she said was true. Filipinos were not us men. Even I, as a princess, would never receive aid if it meant the police had to go against the wishes of the man of my family. But I did not want to think of my problems at that moment. I was wrapped up in Marcy's adventure. Go on, tell me, what did you discover inside? I imagined the inner workings of a Saudi Frankenstein monster. Having the full interest of her mistress, Marcy became enlivened and began to make facial expression and describe her experience with relish. Following his low steps, I was able to look all around. The concrete blocks had never been painted. A small block building nearby had no door, just an open space with stringy old rag pulled across the top. Judging from the thud of dirty mats, open cans, and garbage smells, I knew the old Yemeni must live there. We walked by the family pool, but it was empty of water except for a black foul residue at the deepest end. Their three tiny skeletons, which looked like the remains of a baby kitten, were lying at the short end of the pool. Kittens, oh my goodness. Mercy knew how I loved all the baby animals. What a terrible death. It looked like kittens. I guess they were born in the empty pool and the mother cat was unable to get them out. I shuddered with despair. Mercy continued. The villa was large but had the same coarse look as the walls. Paint had been splashed on the blocks at some time in the past. A sandstorm had left it ugly. There was a garden, but the plants had all died from the lack of water. I saw 4 or 5 birds in a cage hanging under a large tree. They looked sad and skinny, without a song in their hearts to sing. Through the front door, the Yemeni yelled something in Arabic to an unseen person. He nodded his head at me and motioned for me to enter. I hesitated. The doorway at the bad smelling rushed over me with a great fear and trembling. I called out Madeline's name. The Yemeni turned and walked back to his interrupted slave. Madeline came down a long dark hallway. The light was very dim, and after the bright sunshine outside, I could barely see her walking toward me. She began to run when she saw it was really her old friend Marcy. We rushed to embrace, and I was amazed to see that she was clean and smelled good. She was skinnier than when I last saw her, but alive. A feeling of relief flooded my body, for I had expected Marcy to tell me she had found her friend half dead, lying on a dirty mat, struggling to give her final instruction to take her body back to Manila. What happened then? I was in a rush to discover the end of Marcy's story. Marcy's voice took on the tone of a whisper, as though her memories were too painful to recall. After we completed our cries of greeting and our hugs, Madeline pushed me towards the long hallway. She held my hand and guided me to a small room off to the right. Directed me to a sofa. She sat on the floor facing me. She immediately burst into prayer now that we were alone. As she buried her face in my lap, I stroked her hair and whispered for her to tell me what had happened to her. After she stopped her tears, she told me of her life since she had left Manila 1 year before. Madeline was met at the airport by 2 Yemeni servants. They were holding a card with her name spelled out in English. She accompanied the 2 men, for she did not know what else. She was alarmed at their wild appearances and said she feared for her life as they careered through the city. It was late at night when she arrived at the villa. There was no light, so she did not notice the neglected grounds. At that time, the family was away at Makkah for the Hajj pilgrimage. She was shown to her room by the old Arab woman who could not speak English. She was given biscuits and dates to eat and hot tea to drink. As the old woman left the room, she handed Madeline a note that said she would be informed of her duties the following day. The old woman must have been the grandmother. I said, maybe. Madeline did not say. Anyhow, I do not know. Poor Madeline's heart sank when sunlight revealed her new home. She jumped at the sight of the bed in which she had slept. But the bedsheets were filthy. Last night's glass and plates were swarming with cockroaches. With a sinking heart, Madeline located a bathroom only to discover the shower was not functioning. She tried to cleanse herself in the sink with a remnant of dirty soap and tepid water. She wished in a vain for God to calm her beating heart. Then the old woman knocked on the door. Having no choice, she followed the woman into the kitchen where she was handed a list of responsibilities. Mandy read the hastily scribbled note and saw that she was to assist the cook, be the housekeeper, and care for the children. The old woman motioned for Madeline to prepare some food for herself. After eating breakfast, she began to scrub filth off the pots. Along with Madeline, there were three other female employees and an old cook from India, an attractive maid from Sri Lanka, and a plain maid from Bangladesh. The cook was at least 60 years old, the other two were in their mid-20s. The cook refused conversation with anyone. She was returning to India within the next 2 months, and her dreams were of freedom and home. The plain maid was silent in her unhappiness, for her work contract had over a year until completion. The pretty maid from Sri Lanka did little work and spent most of her time in front of a mirror. She wished out loud for the return of the family. She hinted strongly to Madeline that she was much loved by the master of the house. She was expecting him to buy her a gold necklace upon his return from Mecca. Madeline said she was surprised when the pretty maid ordered her to turn around so she could see her figure. The maid then put her hands on her hips and declared with a grin that the master would find Madeline too skinny for his taste, but perhaps one of the sons would find her favorable. Madeline did not understand the implication and went on with her endless cleaning. 4 days later, the family returned from Mecca. Madeline saw at once that her employer were of a low-class family. They were crude and ill-mannered, and their behavior soon proved her assessment correct. They were incidentally wealthy without the effort on their part, and their only education was from Quran, which in their ignorance they twisted to suit their needs. To the head of the household, the secondary status of women indicated in the Quran was understood to be slavery. Any woman who was not a Muslim was considered a prostitute. Matters were not helped by the fact that the father and the two sons traveled to Thailand 4 times a year to visit the brothels in Bangkok and by the sexual service of a young beautiful Thai woman. Knowing that some of the women of the Orient were for sale convinced the family that all the women outside the Muslim faith were for purchase. When a maid was hired, it was assumed she was to be used like an animal at the whim of the man of the house. Through the mother, Madeline immediately learned that she had been employed to serve as a sexual release for the two teenage sons. She informed Madeline that she was to serve Basil and Faris on every other day basis. This information was given without emotion to Madeline's utter despair. To the surprise of the sexy maid, the father decided that Madeline was to his taste. He told his sons they could sleep with the new maids as soon as he had his pleasure. I gasped and then held my breath. I knew what Mercy was going to tell me. I did not want to hear it. Nam Sultana, the first night the family returned, the father raped Madeline. She sobbed. That was only the beginning, for he decided that he loved her so much he continued to rape her on daily basis. Why did she not run away, get someone to help her? Ma'am, she did try. She begged the other servant to assist her. The old cook and the ugly maid did not wish to become involved and perhaps lose their salaries. The pretty maid hated Madeline and said she was the reason she did not get her gold necklace. The wife and the old woman were not treated well themselves by the master. They ignored her and said she was hired to please the man of the house. I would have jumped out of a window and run away. She tried to run away many times. She was caught and everyone in the house was ordered to guard her. Once, while everyone was sleeping, she went to the roof and dropped notes on the pavement, begging for help. The notes were given to the Yemenis by some Saudi neighbor and she was beaten. What happened after you found her? Mercy's face was sad and resigned as she continued. I've heard many things. I called our embassy in Jeddah. I was told by the man that answered that they received many such complaints, but there was a little they could do. Our country relies on the money sent from workers abroad. Our government did not want to antagonize the Saudi government by lodging formal complaint. Where would the poor Filipino people be without money from abroad? Anthony checked with some of the drivers about going to the place, but he was told the police would believe any story told by the Saudi employer and Madeline might get into a worse situation. I cried out, Marcy, what could be the worst situation? Nothing, ma'am, nothing. I did not know what to do. Anthony became frightened and said we could do nothing else. I finally wrote to Madeline's mother and told her of the situation, and she went to the inquiry agency in Manila and was told to go away. She went to our mayor in our town and he said he was helpless. No one wanted to get him. Where is your friend now? I received a letter from her only a month ago. I am thankful she was sent back to the Philippines at the end of her 2-year contract. 2 new Filipinos younger than Madeline had replaced her. Can you believe, ma'am? Madeline was angry at me. She thought I had left her without trying to help. Please believe that I did all that I could. I wrote or letter and explain all that happened. I have not received a reply. I could not say a word in defense of my countryman. I stared into Marcy's face, at a loss. She finally broke the silence, and that man is what happened to my friend in this country. I could tell Marcy was heartbroken for her friend. I myself was stricken with sorrow. How does a person respond to such a terrible horror? I could not. In shame at the man of my country, I no longer felt superior to the young girl who only moments before was my servant, my inferior. Engulfed by remorse, I buried my head into my pillow and dismissed Marcy with a flick of my hand. For many days I was quiet and withdrawn. I thought of the myriad accounts of abuse that tortured the mind of the people, both Saudi and foreigner, living in this land I call my home. How many more Madeleines are there reaching out to uncaring soul and discovering the nothingness that is dressed in the official uniform of those paid to care, and then the man of the Philippines, Marcy's land, were little better than the man of my country, for they fled for personal investment. When I woke from my unsettling sleep of mortification, I began to interrogate my friends and ferret out their positivity regarding the fate of their female servant. Through my tenacity, I was inundated with the first-hand accounts of unspeakable and vile acts committed by men of my culture against women from all the nations. I heard of Shakuntala from India, who at the age of 13 was sold by her family for a sum of 600 Saudi riyal, which is approximately $170. She was worked by day and abused by night in much the same manner as the unsuspecting Madeleine. But the Shakuntala had been bought. She was property that would not be returned. Shakuntala could never go home again. She was the property of her tormentors. I listened in horror as a mother laughingly dismissed the plight of her Thai maid who was raped at will by the son of the house. She said that her son needed sex and that the sanctity of Saudi women forced the family to provide him with his own women. Oriental women do not care whom they go to the bed with. She stated with assurance, wise are kings in the eyes of their mother. Suddenly aware of pervasive evil, I asked Ali why he and father traveled to Thailand and the Philippines 3 times a year. He scowled and told me it was none of my business, but I knew the answer, for many of the brothers and father of my friends made the same trek up to the beautiful land that sold their young girls and women to any beast with money. I discovered that I had known little about men and their sexual appetite. The surface of life is nothing more than a facade. With little effort, I uncovered the evil that lurks under the thin crust of civility between the sexes. I, for the first time in my young life, comprehended the impossible task facing those of our sex. I knew my goal of female equality was hopeless, for I finally recognized that the world of man harbors a morbid condition of overfondness for themselves. We women are vassals, and the walls of our prison are unscalable. For this grotesque disease of preeminence lives in the sperm of all men and is passed along generation to generation. A deadly incurable disease whose host is male and victim is female. Ownership of my body and soul would soon pass from my father to a stranger I would call my husband. The father had informed me I would be but 3 months after my 16th birthday. I felt the chains of tradition wrapped tightly around me. I had only 6 short months of freedom left to savor. I waited for my destiny to unfold, a child as helpless as an insect trapped in a wicked web knot of its making. Chapter 10 Huda. It was 10 o'clock at night on 12 January 1972, and all 9 of my sister and I were spellbound with the telling of Sarah's future by our old Sudanese slave, Huda. Since Sarah's traumatic marriage and divorce, she had taken to study astrology and was convinced that the moon and star had played a determining role in her life's path. Huda, who had filled our ears from an early age with the stories of black magic, was pleased to be the center of attention and to provide distraction from the sameness of life in Del Riyadh. We all know that Huda, in 1899, at the age of 8, after straying from her mother who was busy digging yams for the family supper, had been captured by an Arab slave trader. In our youth, she had entertained the children of the house for countless hours with the saga of her capture and confinement. Much to our merriment, Huda always reenacted her capture with great flair, no matter how many times she retold the story. She would crouch by the sofa and sing softly, pretending to scratch in the sand. With a wild screech, she would yank a pillow cover from behind her back and pull it over the head, gasping and kicking against her imagined tormentor. She would moan and fling herself to the floor and kick and scream for her mother. Finally, she would leap on the coffee table and peered out on the sitting room windows, describing the blue waters of Red Sea from the ship that transported her from Sudan to the desert of Arabia. Her eyes would grow wild as she found imaginary thieves for her small portion of food. She would snatch a peach or a pear from the fruit bowl and hungrily gobble all but the stone. Then she would march solemnly around the room, hands behind her back, chanting to Allah for deliverance as she was led to the slave market. Sold for a rifle to a member of the Rashid clan of Riyadh, she stumbled as she was led from the streets of Jeddah through blinding sandstorm to the Mismag fortress, the garrison for the Rashid clan in the capital city. Now in her reenactment, Huda lurched from one piece of furniture to another. We would squeal with laughter as Huda leaped around the room, dodging bullets from our kin, the young Abdulaziz and his 60 men, as they attacked the garrison and defeated the Rashids, reclaiming the country for the Al Saud's clan. She would throw her fat body over a chair and scramble for cover as the desert warriors slew their enemies. She told of her rescue by my father's father and would end her play acting by wrestling the nearest one to the floor and kissing her repeatedly as she swore she kissed our grandfather upon her rescue. This is how Huda came to be in our family. As we grew older, she diverted us from our various dramas by fighting us with the supernatural claims of sorcery. Mother used to dismiss Huda's proclamation with a smile, but after I woke up screaming about witches and potions, she forbade Huda to divulge her beliefs to the younger children. Now that mother was no longer with us, Huda returned to her former habit with gusto. We watched with fascination as Huda peered at the lines running across Sarah's palm and squinted her beady black eyes as though she saw Sarah's life unfolding before her like a vision. Sarah seemed scarcely affected as though she expected those very words, as Huda solemnly told her she would fail to realize her life's ambition. I groaned and lay back on my heels, so I so wanted Sarah to find the happiness she deserved that I found myself waiting with Huda and loudly dismissed her prophecies as the mumbo-jumbo I wanted them to be. No one paid me any heed as Huda continued to scrutinize Sarah's life plan. The old woman rubbed her bony chin with her hand and muttered, little Sarah, I see here that you will marry soon. She gasped and took her hand from Huda's grasp. The nightmare of another marriage was not what she wanted to hear. Huda laughed softly and told Sarah not to run from her future. She added that Sarah would know a marriage of love and would grace the land with 6 small ones who would give her great joy. Sarah gathered her brow in a worried knot. Then she shrugged her shoulder and dismissed what she could not control. She looked my way and gave a rare smile. She asked Huda to read my palm, saying that if Huda could foretell what actions her unpredictable baby sister would take, then she, Sarah, would be a believer in Huda's power until the end of time. My other sister rocked with laughter as they agreed with Sarah, but I could tell by their looks that they loved me with a furious tenderness. The little sister who so tired their patience. I lifted my head with a haughtiness I did not feel as I floored myself down in front of Huda. I turned my palms up and demanded in a loud and bossy manner to know what I would be doing 1 year from that day. Huda ignored my youthful rudeness and studied my upturned palm for what seemed like hours before announcing my fate. She surprised us all with her posturing. She shook her head, muttered to herself, and groaned aloud as she pondered my future. Finally, she fixed her eyes on my face and uttered her soothsaying with such confidence that I feared her forecast and felt the sinister hot wind of magic in the words she spoke. In a freakish, deep-throated voice, Huda pronounced that father would soon inform me of my upcoming marriage. I would find misery and happiness in one man. I would rain destruction on those around me. My future actions would bring good along with the bad to the family I loved. I would be the beneficiary of great love and the dark hate. I was a force of good and evil. I was an enigma to all who loved me. With a piercing cry, Huda threw her hand in the air and asked Allah to intervene in my life and protect me from myself. She unseated me as she lunged towards me and wrapped her arms my neck and began to lament in a wild, high-pitched howl. Nora jumped to her feet and rescued me from Huda's smothering grasp. My sister comforted me as Nora led Huda from the room, mumbling under her breath for Allah to protect the youngest daughter of her beloved Fazila. I was shivering from the impact of Huda's prediction. I began to sob and blurted out that Huda had bragged to me once about being a witch, that her mother had been a witch before her and the power had flowed from her mother's milk into the suckling infant that was Huda. Indeed, I mourned only a witch could recognize such a one as evil as I. Tahani, one of my older sisters, told me to hush a silly game had grown and there was no need for dramatics. Sarah, in an attempt to lighten the mood, brushed my tears away and said my sorrows were based on the worry that I could never live up to the Huda's wild predictions. Joining Sarah's effort, my other sister began to joke and recalled with a great blaze of laughter some of the capers I had successfully pulled on Ali over the years. They reminded me of one of their favorite, which in our camaraderie we began to tell again. The caper began when I asked one of my girlfriends to call Ali and pretend to be smitten with his charm. For hours we had listened in as he babbled nonsense on the telephone and made elaborate plans to be met by the girl's driver behind a nearby villa under construction. The girl convinced Ali he must be holding a baby goat on a lead so that her driver could identify him. She told him that her parents were out of town. It was safe for Ali to follow the driver to her home for a secret meeting. The building side was across the street from my girlfriend's home, and my sister and I had joined her on her bedroom balcony. We made ourselves sick with the laughter as we watched poor Ali stand for hours holding onto the baby goat and stretching his neck for sign of the driver. Much to our amusement, the girl managed to talk Ali into the same situation not once, not twice, but on 3 occasions. In Ali's eagerness to meet a girl, he had lost his sanity. I remember thinking that this silly wailing business works both ways. Encouraged by my sister's laughter and confidence, I managed to put Huda's rumbling out of my mind. After all, she was over 80 years of age and was more than likely senile. My concentration returned with a rush when father visited us that evening and announced that he had found a suitable husband for me. With a sinking heart, I could only think that the first of Huda's prediction had come true. In my terror, I failed to ask father the name of my husband to be and fled to the room with darkness in my eye and bile in my throat. I lay awake most of the night and thought of Huda's word. For the first time in my young life, I feared my future. Nora returned to our villa the following morning to advise me that I was to wed Cream, one of the royal cousins. As a young child, I had played with this cousin's sister, but regard little she had said about him other than that he was a bossy brother. He was now 28 years of age, and I was to be his first wife. Nora told me that she had a photo of him. He was exceptionally handsome. Not only that, he had been educated in London as a lawyer. Even more unusual, he had distinguished himself from most of the royal cousins in that he held a real position in the business world. Recently, he had opened his own large firm in Riyadh. Nora added that I was very lucky girl for Cream. I had already told father that he wanted me to complete my schooling before starting a family. He did not want a woman with whom he could not share mental exchange. In no mood to be patronized, I made an ugly face at my sister and pulled the bed cover over my head. Nora drew a long breath when I shouted out that I was not the lucky one. Instead, my cousin Cream was the one with luck. After Nora left, I called Cream's sister, whom I knew slightly, and told her to advise her brother that he had best reconsider marrying me. I threatened that if we married, he could not take other wives, or I would poison them all at my first opportunity. Besides, I told her father had had a difficult time finding a husband for me, since I had had an accident in the school lab. When Cream's sister asked me what had happened, I pretended to be shy but finally admitted that I had stupidly dropped a flask of acid. As a result, my face was hideously hard. I had a good laugh and she hung up the phone in a rush to tell her brother. Later that evening, father stamped furiously into the villa with 2 of Cream's aunties in tow. I was forced to stand at attention while they looked me over by any foreign sign officials for our misshapen limbs. I became so angry at the examination that I opened my mouth and told them to check my teeth if they dared. I leaned towards them and made loud chomping sound. Looking back over their shoulder in dismay, they ran out of the room when I neighed like a horse and raised the bottom of my feet to their faces, which is a terrible insult in the Arab world. Father stood and looked at me for a long moment. He seemed to be battling his emotion, and then, to my complete astonishment, he shook his head and began to laugh. I had fully expected a slap or lecture. Never in my wildest imagination did I expect him to laugh. I felt a trembling smile on my face, and then I too began to convulse with laughter. Curious, Sarah and Ali came into the room and stood with a questioning smile on their faces. Father collapsed on the sofa, wiping tears off his face with the hem of his sword. He looked at me and said, Sultana, did you see their faces when you tried to bite them? One looked like a horse herself. Child, you are a wonder. I do not know whether to pity or envy your cousin Cream. Father blew his horn. For sure life with you will be a tempestuous affair. Feeling heavy with my father's approval, I sat on the floor and leaned across his lap. I wanted to hold the moment forever when he squeezed my shoulder and smiled down at his amusing daughter. Taking advantage of the intimate scene, I became brave and asked Father if I could eat cream before the wedding. Father turned and looked at Sarah. Something in her expression touched his heart. He patted the sofa beside him and asked her to sit. There were spoken words among the three of us, but we communicated through the bond of generations. Ali stunned at attention given to the females in the family. He leaned against the door frame with his mouth in a perfect circle. He was struck dumb.